Then I went to Douluo. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 376, Moonlight Fairy. Tang San's various control soul skills fell on Tang Liu one after another. But whether it was the most basic entanglement, parasitism, spider web binding, or the more advanced control of the Azure Destruction Claw and the Blue-Silver Killer Whale Mirror, Tang Liu only needed a simple void spirit control to avoid them all, and he didn't even need to recite the soul spell to use the advanced soul skills. So Tang San tried to change his mind. Since the physical and energy means with entities can be ignored and avoided by the void spirit control, he used some control means without entities. For example, the gravity control from the 100,000-year-old Titan giant ape. As expected, when the gravity control acted on Tang Liu, Tang San saw that Tang Liu's body was unstable for a moment. He just wanted to seize the opportunity to attack, but saw Tang Liu quickly retreating backwards. Then, Tang San felt his body sink, and it felt like he suddenly became several times heavier. This familiar feeling. Gravity control. Tang Liu actually has the same soul skills as him. Of course, there are still some differences to say that they are exactly the same, but it feels like the gravity control Tang Liu used is more advanced than his own. Like a domain. Tang San's eyes condensed. Across from him, a hint of gold flashed in Tang Liu's eyes. The soul skill that helped him get rid of the influence of Tang San's gravity control and return the favor was his second soul skill of the Clear Sky Hammer, the Gravity Disorder Domain. Within the scope of the domain, the concept of gravity will be completely dominated by him. Unless the person in the domain has a stronger control over gravity and gravitation than him. Tang Liu doesn't know much about gravity, but he can definitely beat Tang San. Tang San's use of gravity is still at the basic level of lightning and adding weight. But Tang Liu is different. He has studied physics and received 9 years of compulsory education in high school. So, Tang San, who was still stubbornly resisting the sudden increase in gravity, flew towards Tang Liu uncontrollably the next moment. Tang San didn't see what soul skill Tang Liu used again, but his body suddenly became uncontrollable. He quickly urged the divine power in his body to resist the inexplicable attraction, but it was ineffective. However, he soon realized that it was not suction that pulled him towards Tang Liu. Because in the process of gradually approaching Tang Liu, the feeling was exactly the same as the feeling of falling. Perhaps he found that Tang San had noticed his little trick, so Tang Liu once again changed the direction of gravity in the field. So the next moment, Tang San, who was still falling towards Tang Liu, flew far away at a faster speed, and completely interrupted the countermeasures he had prepared. After finally stabilizing his body, Tang San had no time to see Tang Liu's movements, and a blue-gold illusory light gradually expanded in front of him. He had a strong sense of crisis in his heart, and his body flashed, and he disappeared in an instant, and narrowly avoided the illusory blue-gold light. In the distance, Tang Liu's expression did not show any regret for the missed attack. He just stretched out his hand to recall the Blue-Silver Spirit Emperor Spear, and then used the next soul skill. An illusory Blue-Silver Emperor quietly entangled the illusory spear, and 5 small leaves with golden veins appeared on the crystal-like vine. This meant that Tang Liu had added the power of the 5 soul rings of the Blue-Silver Emperor to the Blue-Silver Emperor Spear. They were the first soul ring of the Virtual Spirit Control. The second soul ring of the Virtual Spirit Concealment. The third soul ring of the Virtual Spirit Protection. The fourth soul ring of the Virtual Spirit Breath. There was also the 8th soul ring from the Bright Moon Elf, 2 new soul skills, the Chant of the Virtual Spirit, and the Silence of the Virtual Spirit. The soul skills used by the first 4 soul rings and the effects of those 4 soul skills naturally need no further explanation. They added the ability of virtualization, concealing breath, reducing the influence of enemy soul skills, and purifying enemy soul skills to the Blue-Silver Emperor Spear. The role of the Chant of the Virtual Spirit is pure amplification, an amplification of all attributes, which is added to the Blue-Silver Emperor Spear to enhance its power in all aspects. As for the Void Spirit Silence, this is the first real offensive soul skill of Tang Liu's first martial soul, the Void Spirit Blue-Silver Emperor. It adds the same destructive power to the Blue-Silver Spirit Emperor Spear as this soul skill directly acts on the target. At present, Such a blow can rank among the top 5 in terms of lethality among all Tang Liu's offensive means. In other words, even if Tang San is now at the level of God King, he dare not take this shot head-on. After all, how disgusting the effects of Tang Liu's auxiliary soul skills are can be seen from the enemies who have fought with him. However, the existence of the 2 soul skills of Void Spirit Control and Void Spirit Breath can make Tang Liu's shot almost impossible to be blocked by any method. Of course, this attack still has its flaws, that is, it can still be dodged. The premise is that Tang Liu did not add the power of cause and effect to this spear. And Tang Liu naturally did not add it to the Blue Silver Spirit Emperor Spear. Tang San did not know that Tang Liu had mastered a certain amount of cause and effect, but he also made the best response method at the moment. His eyes instantly turned purple, and the purple extreme divine light flew towards Tang Liu, intending to disrupt Tang Liu's mental lock with a mental attack, and then immediately dodged the Blue Silver Spirit Emperor Spear that flew again. But at the moment when the purple extreme divine light flew out, Tang Liu's eyes also turned purple, and then moonlight lit up and spewed out from his eyes, like 2-foot-long knives, meeting the purple extreme divine light. Just like Tang San used the purple extreme demon pupil plus the spirit skill purple extreme divine light attached to the spirit condensed wisdom skull, Tang Liu also used the purple extreme demon pupil, plus the spirit skill of his head spirit bone, soul crack. The purple extreme divine light, which was also amplified by the purple extreme demon pupil, collided with his soul crack, and then turned into violent mental power fluctuation that could make both of them a little dazed and spread out. Although Tang San's purple extreme divine light failed to hit Tang Liu in the end, and he himself did not have time to dodge, he still achieved his goal, because the brief mental trance still caused Tang Liu's Blue Silver Spirit Emperor Spear, which he threw again, to deviate slightly and failed to hit Tang San. Even though Tang Liu recovered from the mental trance a moment faster than Tang San, he still lost the perfect opportunity to attack just now. Even though Tang San is now a God King, and the level of his spiritual power has also been raised to the realm that a God King should have, Tang Liu is not inferior to him. Now that the external soul bone demon eye has grown to the level of 100,000 years, and the external soul bone evil pupil condensed from most of the soul bones peeled off from the evil eye tyrant ruler who is nearly 800,000 years old, plus a complete 500,000-year-old bright moon elf head soul bone, the power of 3 top-level spiritual attribute soul beasts, not only directly pushed Tang Liu's spiritual power to a tangible and substantial level, but also pushed his purple extreme demon eye to the final vast realm. If it weren't for Tang Liu's current realm, the resonance of these 3 soul bones would bring Tang Liu's spiritual realm to an unparalleled height. But even now, his spiritual power would not be inferior to that of the God King. It would even be stronger. The author would like to call this chapter a detailed list of my new skills and equipment. I added quotation marks. Cyrillic letter Z. Zhong Yingmi continues to walk. Recently, there is no inspiration for the short drama, so it should all go to Zhong Yingmi that I am writing. Cyrillic letter Z. Chapter 377 Decisive Battle. Even though the former god of Shura had told Tang San with great certainty that Tang Liu was not able to defeat a God King, Tang San could not help but feel nervous. Judging from the various methods Tang Liu had shown so far, it seemed that he was not able to fight against a God King. They did not need to fight. Speaking of which, it was because he had become a little shaken after listening to the rhetoric of the former sea god and god of Shura, and seeing a vague future scene that he did not know whether it would happen or not. Although not long ago, Tang Liu was still planning to take away his godhood. It seemed that everything was developing towards the future he saw. He and Tang Liu stopped attacking in tacit understanding at this time, just floating quietly in place, silently looking at each other. After a long time, Tang San took the lead and said, "Why do you want to take away the godhood of the God King, Xiao Liu?" Tang Liu's eyes moved slightly, and he habitually curled his lips and gave Tang San a slightly mocking smile. "Maybe, it's just because I am willing. Do you have to destroy everything here before you can go back?" Tang San finally asked the deepest doubt in his heart. Tang Liu recalled the scene he saw in the secret room on the top floor of the old Haoshan castle, and without hesitation, only by destroying all the key things and forcing the world consciousness to restart the entire universe, can I find the door to my home at the beginning of the creation of this world. Tang San was a little excited. "Isn't this your home? Isn't the place where my parents are and where I am your home?" He seemed to be stimulated by the alienation in Tang Liu's previous words, and said those words in an explosive manner. But then, The young man's enthusiastic emotions were like a fire that encountered a heavy rain, and suddenly extinguished. It was just because he saw the contempt, ridicule, and indifference in the eyes of the person opposite. It was like a person who was used to the height of the mountain, but was forced to stand at the height of the ant. Such disdain, such aggrieved. Everything he had was insignificant and not worth mentioning to the creature at that height. This made his heart instantly cold. You know, I was thrown into this world inexplicably. There was no reason, no logic, just a simple test, and I had to do as they said and play with you guys here until now. As if he had finally untied some constraints, Tang Liu's tone became more and more frivolous. Besides, I just want to go back to my world. Even if your universe will restart because of this, it will eventually return to the present one day. You will not lose anything, right? In fact, everything in your life will return to normal. After all, Tang Liu suddenly showed a malicious smile. In the normal timeline, you don't have any brothers and sisters, right? Doesn't my disappearance just make you perfect? Why don't you cooperate with me to bring the end and rebirth to this world? Then I will leave here forever, and your life will return to normal, and you don't have to worry about me creating any uncontrollable accidents for you. Isn't this a win-win situation? Tang San suddenly clenched the Poseidon trident in his hand and rushed towards Tang Liu at a rapid speed. You bastard, it's unreasonable. Tang Liu laughed unscrupulously, and everything Tang San showed now seemed to make him feel very happy. Facing the Seagate trident waved by Tang San, he simply condensed a Hyaolin force field and blocked it, then looked at Tang San's red eyes and said playfully, "It seems that you are not going to cooperate? However, just the words of the Seagate are far from enough. If you really want to stop me, then use the power of the Shura God to kill me once and for all." As soon as the voice fell, the Hyaolin force field in front of him suddenly burst out with an extremely powerful rebound force, which actually made Tang San's Seagate trident fly out of his hand and fall to the ground. At this time, Tang Liu also changed his tactics, leaving Tang San no chance to recall the Seagate trident. Tang Liu pressed on step by step. Take out your Shura sword. If you don't want this world to be doomed to disappear, use all your strength to kill me. Tang San just pursed his lips tightly, said nothing, and relied on the majestic divine power to resist Tang Liu's attacks again and again. Seeing him like this, Tang Liu suddenly felt bored. He said calmly, "It seems that whether this world is dead or alive is not a big deal to you," but he immediately gave a smile full of strong malice, which made Tang San feel frightened from the bottom of his heart. If so, in the future, you can only watch Xiao Wu disappear into the end with this world. The blood-red light was like a shocking rainbow, almost brushing past Tang Liu's face, and also cut a huge gully in the blue light that painted half of the sky behind him, like a natural moat that could not be healed for a long time. Tang Liu turned back, raised his hand and rubbed his cheek that had become a little cold and numb, and looked at Tang San, who was holding the Shura sword and completely transformed into the Shura God, with irony, and said, "Sure enough, Xiao Wu is your biggest weakness." Tang San looked at him coldly. Tang Liu put on that malicious smile again. "I'm just a little curious, if one of the father or mother and Xiao Wu were in mortal danger at the same time, who would you choose to save?" Tang San said coldly, "You don't deserve to mention them." The irony on Tang Liu's face became stronger. Avoiding a direct answer, Tang San began to spread murderous aura around him. "I thought before that there were still some emotions left in your heart. Now it seems that I was wrong." He raised the Shura sword, pointed the sword at Tang Liu, and issued the Shura God's oracle representing justice and judgment. The Shura God Tang San will execute the judgment from the God realm on you today and at this moment. Cut off your flesh and end your fate. I will never stop until your soul is shattered." Tang Liu raised his hands on both sides of his head and grinned. "This is really a ruthless judgment on me." His palms were slightly tilted, and a faint blue-black light shone on them. And that was how he resisted the full-strength sword, swung by the double-position God King and Shura God in front of him with the power of the law. It always looks like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Just like all the people who were nervously watching the battle in the sky. In order to prevent himself from missing anything, Tang Hao has not blinked for a long time. His eyes were full of bloodshot, and the man's silence made him look like a ferocious lion who was suppressing his anger. And he was really about to explode at this moment. But Tang Xiao kept holding him and not letting him act rashly. So he could only endure and suppress it. He felt dry mouth and throat dry. It was an instinctive swallowing action, but he couldn't do it again. Until he saw a meteor with blue light falling rapidly from the sky. The man's figure shot out. Tang Xiao, who should have held him, calmly retracted his hand that had actually been released long ago, but he had to pretend to be in pain so that others present would not notice anything unusual. In the back, a soul beast carrier pigeon landed silently on Dai Mu Bei's shoulder. So the string that had been tense in his mind also relaxed at this moment. Oh, this chapter is really difficult to write. But it's finally here. Finally, Daoichi is about to say goodbye. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378 Ending. Tang Hao still didn't have time to rush over. No matter how fast he was, even if he was already a level 99 peerless Douluo. But he was still not as fast as the sword energy full of murderous intent slashed out by a god king. Tang Hao could only watch the light and shadow of the sure blood sword slash through Tang Liu. In the blink of an eye, Tang Liu's body, which was still falling freely in the air, disappeared in the blood-red sword light. At the same time, a loud noise came from the ground. Tang Hao looked down and saw only a piece of flying dust, and a little blue light looming in the dust. He was shocked and flew down immediately, waving away the dust around him, and his eyes immediately locked onto the figure lying at the bottom of the deep pit, covered in blood. Tang Hao forced himself not to look at the hideous wound on his body that extended from his left shoulder to his right waist. The man just covered Tang Liu's cold and bloody cheek with his trembling hands. Hey, look at me, concentrate, don't close your eyes, okay? Xia Liu, Tang Hao called out for a long time, but he only got a look from Tang Liu that had become a little distracted. After a while, Tang Liu forced a smile. His voice rang in Tang Hao's mind. Tell my mother I'm sorry. In his mind, his voice seemed to still echo. But Tang Liu had already slightly supported half of his body, and a strong blue light burst out from his body again. He raised his hand, almost using up the last bit of his strength, and pushed Tang Hao far away. Tang Liu didn't care about the man's shouting, and his upper body fell back into the pit, casting his eyes on the sky that was already completely blood-red. He whispered softly, "It's been a long time since I saw you." Then, he quietly watched a golden light fall from the sky and come towards him. He knew that it would be the blow that completely took his life. It was also the end of his time in this era. Tang Liu closed his eyes somewhat peacefully. But in the next moment, he suddenly realized something and instinctively opened his eyes again. He saw a figure with blonde hair and white clothes suddenly broke into his sight. The bright blonde hair looked even more dazzling than the golden light that was falling rapidly in the sky. Everything happened so fast. It was so fast that Tang Liu could only instinctively open his arms and embrace the figure falling towards him, feeling the weakness of that body. "This is probably the last thing I can do for you," he listened to her voice ringing in his ears, so weak, but full of deep affection. Although he couldn't see her expression. But he could guess that her face should be satisfied now, but with some regrets. The 180,000-pound Poseidon trident was finally blocked by Jinrixu's body. Tang Liu just hugged her. His face was blank, his eyes were shocked, unbelievable, confused and helpless. He wanted to do something to save the person whose life was fading rapidly in his arms. But he really had no other choice. He was just a spent force. He cast his eyes on the red figure that appeared at the edge of the hole he had smashed. The man's face was cold and unmoved. So Tang Liu retracted his gaze and whispered, "You won't die?" The person in his arms moved slightly. It seemed to say that it doesn't matter, as long as you don't die in front of me, and I can only watch your life gradually fade away. His voice became softer, "This is my promise." A faint blue light emerged from his body again. Those blue lights turned into thousands of misty points, and then condensed into misty fog. Floating and caressing, quietly blending into Jinrixu's gradually cold body. Jinrixu's eyes, which were originally closed, trembled slightly, and then slowly opened. There was still some confusion in her eyes, and then she realized something, and nervously and eagerly propped up her body, looking at the face she had been thinking about. Then, she melted into the gentleness on that face. All the fear and anxiety disappeared in that warmth and turned into peace. She heard him whispering softly, a whisper that belonged only to them. "In the name of the myriad avenues, are you willing to follow my footsteps with a sincere heart, listen to the whispers of all things, and seek higher peaks?" She looked into his blue eyes, which were filled with a warmth of expectation and encouragement. So she said, I wish. She added silently in her heart. As long as you are there, I will always be there. She heard the person under her smile softly, Su. Then, goodbye, Tang Liu said the last sentence, and his eyes turned to the red figure who was watching everything silently at the edge of the pit. Watching him wave gently. The sea god's trident pierced through Jinring Su, whose figure had become transparent, and pierced Tang Liu's abdomen. Tang Liu's body arched up involuntarily because of the severe pain, and then fell back to the ground because of gravity. He could no longer see, hear, or feel anything. So he didn't see the tears falling from Jinring Su's eyes. He couldn't hear her screaming. He couldn't even feel the pain. He just turned his head slightly and closed his eyes. Blood was still flowing out of his mouth. Until it finally turned into blue light and slowly drifted away. Jinring Su also disappeared. Tang San didn't know where she went. He didn't care. He just numbly recalled the sea god trident inserted in the ground, and then waved his hand in the void lightly, as if he had recovered something. Then he stood there, quietly for a while. Finally, he flew away quickly. We should go too, in the barrier, Mu Jing broke the silence. Our mission is not yet completed. Before that, there is only one thing we have to do, survive, otherwise it will be too late. No one responded to her, but she looked at the solemn faces of her teammates and knew that they were thinking the same thing as she did at this time. So she crushed the blue rune in her hand. Everyone in the barrier disappeared at the same place. No one knew where they went. Sunset Forest, yin-yang eyes of ice and fire. Tang San, with blue hair like a waterfall, fell from the sky quickly. He knelt directly in front of the huge blue-silver emperor in the center of the yin-yang eye of ice and fire, and extended his hand to send out an illusory light. The blue-silver emperor did not move at all. There was no joy of the arrival of his child. It was dead silent. Tang San did not move either, and kept kneeling. I don't know how long it took, and another figure fell from the sky. It was Tang Hao. But now he seemed to be much older than before. Even though he had a piece of Jixin jade bone in his body that could keep him young forever. He turned his back to the kneeling Tang San, raised his head, and closed his eyes tightly. No one knew what he was thinking at the moment. Similarly, no one knew what Yin, who had been silent all the time, was thinking at the moment. At this moment, they were just an ordinary pair of heartbroken father and mother. Finally, the battle is over. Sprinkle flowers. Next are some necessary plot supplements and the epilogue. After the classes resumed, studying became intense again, crying, but the author will try to ensure daily updates. After all, the author is also looking forward to the story of Douluo 2. Because the author fell into this pit of online literature because of Douluo 2, it is always memorable. Thumbs up. Recently, in addition to writing about the British and American variety shows, the author is also revising another article on this author account, an old pit in 2017. Unfortunately it was locked, and strive to unblock that book as soon as possible. See you at the epilogue tomorrow. After the epilogue, it is the pre-plot of Douluo 2. Good night everyone. Chapter 379 Epilogue. Outside the yin-yang eyes of ice and fire. Tang San knelt there. 3 days had passed since the last battle. The missing part of a yin that he had retrieved from Tang Liu was finally taken over by a yin late at night. The following day, the illusory light image formed by the condensation of soul power seemed to be holding the rarest treasure in the world, smiling gently and happily, but crying silently. But how could the light and shadow shed tears? So the scattered tears, just after leaving the cheeks, scattered everywhere, like the starlight at dawn, disappearing so decisively. This is the time of your birth. He only heard a yin say this. The voice was so light that it seemed not from this world. And he just felt dazed. Tang Hao has been standing motionless by the spring since he came back. After confirming that a yin began to recover slowly, Tang San quietly left the yin-yang eyes of ice and fire, but he did not dare to go far away, and just knelt outside. After all, he was ashamed of his parents. That made him ashamed to face them again. Until now. The third day. He waited for Xiao Wu. His lover said nothing, just hugged him silently, and then stayed by his side. Xiao Wu wanted to kneel down with him. But he took on his responsibility alone. His divine power has always hindered Xiao Wu. Sunrise, sunset. The 5th day. Today he saw Douluo. This poison Douluo also gave him a chance to cultivate to level 99 as Tang Liu had promised him. Now he's already level 98, only one step away from entering the level of Peerless Douluo. The old monster didn't say much, just stood here with him for a while in silence, and then left in a hurry. The 8th day. Today he met Shrek's teachers and his partners who fought side by side. However, the relationship between the Shrek 7 devils now seems to be a little awkward. Because for them, Tang Liu is also a partner of life and death. The 8 of them are the Shrek monster group. In the end, it was the leader of the 7 devils, Daimyo Bei, who patted Tang San on the shoulder and took Zhu's Huking away first. They still have to go back to Xingluo to deal with a series of things. The teachers of the academy were just like Dugubo. They stood here with Tang San for a while and then left. Xiao Wu was the only one left beside Tang San again. The 10th day. Tang Hao and the fully recovered Yin walked out of the yin-yang eyes of fire and ice and came to him. Tang San didn't dare to look them in the eye. He was afraid that he would accidentally see a bit of disappointment in their eyes. But after a long silence, he only heard Tang Hao's low and somewhat hoarse voice. Go and do what you should do, Xiao-san. Your mother and I have decided to travel around. You don't need to come to us. When we think it's appropriate, we will come to you. Tang San kowtowed heavily to the 2 elders. He didn't stand up again until he felt that Tang Hao and Yin had completely disappeared from the reach of his senses. Xiao Wu hugged him. He leaned his head on Xiao Wu's shoulder, his face showing a blank look. They didn't leave here immediately. Instead, they stayed here for a few more days. Then Tang San saw the former sea god and azure god appear in front of him at the same time. There were no questions or arguments. Tang San just watched them silently, waiting for the 2 former gods to speak. 15 days after the God War, the armies of Xiandao and Xingluo attacked Wuhan City at the same time, almost completely wiping out all the remaining forces of Wuhan Palace. While the soldiers of the 2 countries were cheering and celebrating, the blood-red Shura god Tang San suddenly descended into Wuhan City. The soldiers who were still cheering all fell silent, looking at the god in the sky with both love and awe. The god at the intersection of their eyes, with a somewhat indifferent look, gently swept over everyone present, and then, a small voice easily reached everyone's ears. Where is Xiandao Zubeng? After a while, the former Prince Zubeng, now the Lord of the Empire and Tang San's disciple, walked out from the crowd of generals. He saluted Tang San in the air respectfully. Disciple greets the teacher. Tang San didn't waste words and went straight to the point. I will continue to stay on Douluo continent for a while, and will go to the God realm after dealing with the unfinished business. Now, I want you to promise me one thing, not to go to war with Xingluo within 1,000 years. Zubeng nodded slightly. If Xingluo does not take the initiative to invade, my Xiandao will follow your oracle. Tang San nodded, and then looked at all the generals present. Second thing, I hope someone can provide me with information about these people. Xingluo Empire, outside Xingluo City. The National Master's mansion stood alone here, wondering if it could wait for his master. Suddenly, a red light descended from the sky, and finally turned into a blood-red figure, floating in front of the towering National Master's mansion. His eyes indifferently swept across this magnificent manor. The next moment, he drew out a blood-red long sword and waved it lightly. The sword light, which was 1,000 miles long, raised the entire Imperial Master's mansion to the ground in the blink of an eye. All the buildings disappeared in the terrifying sword light. In the end, only some foundation bricks and stones were left. Apart from that, there was nothing else. He took a last look at the ruins of the Imperial Master's mansion and disappeared on the spot. Not long after he disappeared, Daimyo Bei and a group of elders and soldiers of the Xingluo Empire arrived here. Daimyo Bei looked at the ruins in front of him, was silent for a long time, and then ordered, "Go in and check." A team of people quickly walked out and entered the ruins of the Imperial Master's mansion one after another and began to patrol. A few minutes later, everyone came back. The leader reported, "Your Highness, the 6 coffins have all disappeared, and none of them survived." Daimyo Bei was silent for a long time again, and finally waved his hand gently, saying, "Pass my order and have someone build an identical one on it and change its name to the Duke's mansion." After that, he turned and left. The others followed him. "Tang San, you did a great job. From now on, there will be no more outsiders in our world, and we have confirmed with the 2 God Kings of Goodness and Evil that the backup plan left by the outsider has been completely destroyed by you. The major worry has been eliminated, and we can travel around the universe without worry. I hope you can finish your affairs in the mortal world as soon as possible and come to the God realm to replace us as soon as possible. From now on, the safety of the universe under our jurisdiction will be handed over to you." Walking out of the God realm committee, Tang San's expression was actually a little numb. Even though he was not the sure god at this time, but the tolerant and vast sea god. He quietly looked at the unique scenery of the god realm, and then disappeared. The author was delayed for a while by the organic experiment tonight, so it was a bit late. There should be a small part of the epilogue to be explained tomorrow, and then enter Dao Ai. The author has a full class tomorrow, literally full class from morning to night, but the author hasn't written the physics experiment report due tomorrow, which is a headache. JPG. I haven't written the comprehensive English and American papers for 2 days. Tearful expression. Good night, everyone. Chapter 380 Follow-up. On the third day after the God War, a carriage quietly drove into the Haitian city of Xingluo Empire. After entering the city, the carriage did not stop, but continued to move forward until it arrived at the foot of the towering mountain in the city. The driver straightened his hat, raised his head, and squinted his eyes to glance at the top of the mountain hidden in the clouds. Not long after, 4 disciples of the Haitian sect carried a wooden box that looked a bit like a coffin, or a wooden cabinet, and walked into the Haitian castle. The 4 disciples of the Haitian sect continued to go deeper and came to the top floor of the Haitian castle with ease, and then placed a long wooden box on their shoulders on the floor of the top room. It was as if they had practiced this countless times. After they put the coffin in the designated position and stood in a row in front of the long wooden box, a blue light flashed, and the long wooden box disappeared into the room. But as the long wooden box disappeared, 4 more blue lights flew out from where the long wooden box was before, and fell into the hands of the 4 Haitian sect disciples. The blue light then turned into 4 different things in their palms. A map, a token, a document, and a bracelet for storage. The Haitian sect disciple who got the bracelet took out the things in the bracelet as soon as possible. There were suddenly 4 completely different soul power fluctuations in the room. But without exception, the 4 auras were extremely domineering. They were 4 soul bones. 4 right arm bones. Although the properties were different, they were all the most suitable for them. And based on the aura, it was estimated that the age of these 4 soul bones would not be less than 30,000 years. The 4 people widened their eyes and looked at each other. The sect master was really generous, and he gave away 4 soul bones casually. The 4 people happily divided the soul bones, and immediately opened the document. After a rough look, they opened the map without stopping. Then they put away the tokens and documents, followed the instructions on the map, and left the old Haitian castle, where no disciples of the Haitian sect had stayed. Just after they left, the old Haitian castle was shrouded in layers of clouds and mist. It could no longer be seen. At the same time, similar scenes also occurred in several other places in Douluo continent. But without exception, they were all in the Xingluo Empire. Haitian City is a small city in the southeast of the Xingluo Empire. But a family that had been destroyed long ago quietly rose here a few years ago. Tang Jin carefully placed the 2 long wooden boxes that the servants had delivered this morning in the underground secret room that had been built for more than 2 years. With a smile on his face, his rough palm slowly stroked the doors of the 2 wooden boxes. The man's lips moved slightly, and he said goodbye silently. Then, he turned and left. After he left, dancing complex blue array patterns gradually lit up in this underground secret room. The 2 long wooden boxes were suddenly in a dreamlike blue light. Somewhere is a place of heavenly punishment that is easy to defend and difficult to attack. The ancient sect hidden in the mountains welcomed 2 crudely made long wooden boxes today. The sect leader looked at them silently for a while, then ordered the disciples to move the 2 long wooden boxes to the forbidden area. The ancient and majestic gate closed again. This behemoth fell into silence again. 1 year later. Xingluo Empire. South China Sea important town, Xinghai City. As the largest coastal city in Xingluo Empire, a plan that Xingluo had secretly implemented several years ago finally ushered in its true birth today. The current emperor of Xingluo Empire, Daimyo Bei, the white tiger Douluo, who has inherited the god of war divine test and has reached the 99th level of cultivation, brought his imperial concubine Zhu, the candidate of the god of the netherworld, and the 99th level netherworld Douluo, to see the foundation of the national master's plan for Xingluo's future. They were built with the efforts of the whole country. There were huge ships one after another, quietly moored at the dock. The ships were of different sizes, but the smallest was also 100 meters long. The largest ship, surrounded by many smaller ships, looked close to 1,000 meters. Daimyo Bei and Zhu stepped down from the emperor's carriage, and looked at the huge ships floating on the sea and wandering in the morning light with shock and admiration. Then, they looked at the people who came to the other side in a hurry. The one in the lead had blonde hair and double pupils, and his appearance was somewhat similar to Daimyo. Daimyo smiled and walked up to him and hugged him. "Your Majesty." After a short hug, the man nodded slightly to Daimyo and saluted. Daimyo patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "You and I are brothers, so there is no need to be so polite." The man also smiled and said, "Since you have inherited the throne, even if I am the elder brother, I must follow the necessary etiquette. Moreover, now as an elder brother, all I can do is to assist you wholeheartedly. After all, the national teacher has been very kind to me, and this is exactly what he hoped for when he was alive." Daimyo also became serious and said solemnly, "You are right. The spirit of the national teacher in heaven will surely protect my Douluo for thousands of years of prosperity." The man nodded gently. "It depends on whether this trip goes smoothly. To reach the continent that the national teacher mentioned, the first difficulty we have to overcome is this endless sea and the unfathomable sea soul beasts in the sea." Daimyo smiled and said, "Don't worry too much, the national teacher has already made arrangements for this." Yes, the national teacher can do everything. After a brief chat, it was time for them to set off early. The man said goodbye to Daimyo. Daimyo shook hands with him solemnly. "This is the first link of Douluo's 10,000-year plan. The rest is all up to you, my brother." The man shook his hand back heavily, showing his determination. "I will not fail in your mission." Daimyo looked at the familiar faces behind him again, and a strange smile flashed across his eyes, but the solemn look on his face perfectly covered it up. He looked at those geniuses who had once been amazing on the Douluo continent, and those titled Douluos who had caused them a lot of trouble. He couldn't help but think in his heart, this is the arrangement of his national teacher. This is the powerful helper left to him by his national teacher. Daimyo watched the group of people, as well as a large number of Douluo Empire soldiers and specially selected civilians, board the huge ships parked at the dock one after another. Zhu Huqing came up and took Daimyo's hand. She was also looking at the soldiers boarding the ship, and then whispered to Daimyo, "Davis, Zhu Huiyan, Hulina, Ziyu, Yan, and the titled Douluo, Ju, Gui, Ming, and Ling, do you really trust them? You didn't even place people you trust around them." Daimyo grabbed her waist and picked her up. He ignored Zhu Huqing's exclamation, just looked at her slightly pink cheeks and smiled. "Of course I can't trust them completely." He held Zhu Huqing and sat back on their imperial carriage. "But I believe in my national master, the national master's medicine and incense, as well as the national master's modification of their cognition, are the best helpers I have placed around them." Davis didn't remember that he had fought to the death with Daimyo for the throne. He is now just a good brother who is wholeheartedly assisting Daimyo with all his strength. Similarly, in the cognition of others, they are all loyal subordinates of Daimyo. Their past has long bid farewell to them. And they will also drive into a brand new future. Zhu Huqing bit her red lips lightly, and the look she gave Daimyo was surprisingly a little resentful. She said, "Sometimes, I feel that you don't trust me as much as you trust Xia Liu." Daimyo laughed and winked at her. "That's friendship between men." He got into the carriage and raised his hand to lower the elegant door curtain of the carriage. Just when the door curtain was about to completely cover everything outside the car, Daimyo looked towards the beach not far away. Indistinctly, there seemed to be a blue shadow wading through the waves, holding the salty wind from the sea and the warm morning light, looking in the direction where hundreds of giant ships were leaving. It was like a silent blessing. The corners of Daimyo's lips rose slightly, allowing the door curtain to completely cover all the scenes outside the carriage. He looked forward and said silently in his heart, "Goodbye, my national teacher. May you have a good dream in heaven." End of course does not mean the end. Today the author is making up for Wednesday's class, and in the evening is C language, which is even more daunting than organic and physical experiments. Despair. See you tomorrow. Chapter 381 10,000 years. I have heard that the sky is high and the earth is far away, and we will meet again someday. When the geese migrated south, I looked back and found that my old friend had left long ago. Now I see the stars shifting and the world changing. Time flies, and when I look up again, it has been 10,000 years. History will not stop flowing because of the loss of one person. All humans can do is to do their best to leave a strong mark in the history book of this world in their short lives. And that is just a small punctuation mark in that history book. At most a word, a sentence. Moreover, It is the path that the world itself will go. Humanity has little influence on it. Just like 1,000 years ago, no one could have predicted that there was another continent in this world. And that continent even collided and merged with the Douluo continent 1,000 years ago, and eventually became the larger Douluo continent today. It's just that the fusion of the two continents does not mean that the people living on the two continents can live in harmony. We don't know the details now, but the historical records handed down show that the people living on that continent were very aggressive and mastered a powerful weapon, Soul Guide. At that time, the fighting method on our Douluo continent was still the traditional close combat between soul masters and soldiers. The only means of long-range attack was the hidden weapons handed down by Tang San, the ancestor of the Tang sect 10,000 years ago. But the final result was tragic, because the hidden weapons from the Tang sect were completely incomparable to the Soul Guide weapons on that continent in terms of attack distance and lethality. Therefore, the two major empires on the Douluo continent, the Xiandao Empire and the Xingluo Empire, were almost defeated in the direct battle with the countries on that continent. But later, we still won the battle. Because at the end of the war, a group of extremely powerful top soul masters suddenly united, and then with a call for hundreds of responses, genius soul masters of all levels spontaneously united to give the invaders a head-on blow. In front of this group of amazing and powerful soul masters, even the powerful Soul Guide weapons on that continent are not as good as them. And those talented soul masters all have a common identity, that is, graduates of Shrek Academy. Therefore, after this battle, the status of Shrek Academy in Douluo continent has been rising steadily. After all, if there were no talented soul masters trained by Shrek Academy, perhaps the current Douluo continent would not be called Douluo continent, and the two ancient countries above it, Xiandao and Xingluo, would no longer exist. If there was no Shrek Academy, the current Douluo continent should be renamed Sun Moon Continent, and the Sun Moon Empire, which was originally rooted only in the Sun Moon Continent, would completely rule the entire Douluo continent. Of course, although Douluo continent won the war, it still paid a heavy price. First, the former Xiandao Empire split and became the current Xianan Empire and Daling Empire. Secondly, the royal family of the Xingluo Empire changed hands. The White Tiger royal family that had always ruled Xingluo became the Duke of Xingluo, and the real rulers became the descendants of an ancient sect who possessed the top weapon spirit, the Star Crown. Finally, there was the rapid decline of the Tang sect, which was once the #1 sect in the world. Up to now, it seems that the inheritance has been cut off, and there is no longer any news about the Tang sect. But what really established Shrek Academy's position as the #1 academy on the continent was the Star Dao Beast Tide shortly after that war. On the entire Douluo continent, including the Sun and Moon continent plate that was later merged, the largest gathering place for soul beasts, the Star Dao Great Forest, launched a beast tide that almost killed all living things shortly after that war. The cause was that a sect that had been secluded from the world suddenly slaughtered soul beasts over 100,000 years old in the Star Dao Great Forest, which aroused the anger of Dagon, the beast god who lived in the Star Dao Great Forest, and the golden-eyed Black Dragon King who had cultivated for more than 800,000 years. So the beast tide happened. In the end, it was Shrek Academy that turned the tide. After that, Shrek Academy broke away from all countries and became an independent existence. It moved from Xiandao City to the outside of the Star Dao Great Forest, which is now Shrek City, to monitor the Star Dao Great Forest and serve as the first line of defense for all humans on the continent. It also completely became the first academy on the continent, and countless talented soul masters wanted to go in for further study. In the wide white brick dome palace, a middle-aged man was talking to more than a dozen little kids below, telling this story that was widely circulated on the Douluo continent. When mentioning Shrek Academy, every little kid's eyes lit up with a sparkling light, and their expressions were full of desire. You are 4 years old now. In 2 years, it will be time for the Soul Awakening ceremony. If some of you have excellent talents, then you should practice well in the next few years. If you can practice to the level of a great soul master before the age of 11, then you will definitely be able to pass the assessment of Shrek Academy and become a member of the first academy on the continent. Of course, this will be difficult. However, even if you have not practiced to the level of a great soul master at the age of 11, you still have a chance to pass the assessment of Shrek Academy. After all, their rule is that you must practice to the 20th level after 1 year of entering the school, and obtain the second soul ring before the start of the second year to enter the great soul master level. The middle-aged man was a little tired of talking, so he stopped, drank a sip of tea, moistened his throat, and continued, "Then let's stop here today. If you don't have any questions for me, you can go back to your respective courtyards." More than a dozen little kids stood up in unison, and then rushed out of the small temple. After a while, they all scattered and disappeared. The middle-aged man held a teacup and smiled and shook his head. After packing up the tea set, the middle-aged man called the servants and told them to clean up the palace. Then he walked out of the small palace with his hands behind his back. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw two little kids squatting by the door. The two little kids did not appear in the classroom, but the middle-aged man was not unfamiliar with them. The reason why the two little kids did not listen to him in the classroom was because they were wearing extremely simple coarse linen clothes. It was completely different from the brocade and silk of the other little kids. But the middle-aged man treated all children equally. Even if the mistress of this Fu-I personally ordered that too much contact with the two little kids was not allowed. The middle-aged man did not understand why the mistress had such great malice towards the two young children, but he could guess a little. It was nothing more than the old-fashioned story of a rich man falling in love with a commoner girl and marrying a wife who was well matched. In the past few years, he has been wandering among the nobles of Douluo, and the middle-aged man said that he was used to it. It's coming, the plot of an hour has begun. See you tomorrow. Chapter 382 Yu Hao. The middle-aged man looked at the two children and smiled in his heart. If his guess was correct, it would depend on the martial spirit awakening ceremony in 2 years. He was quite familiar with the rules and traditions of this Fu-I. Therefore, no matter which of the two children awakened the inherited martial spirit of the master of this Fu-I, no matter how powerful the lady was here, she could no longer prevent the two children from entering the side of the master of Fu-I. This was not only the rule of this Fu-I, but also the rule of the entire continent. Of course, if none of the two children awakened the inherited martial spirit, then the lady could naturally continue to hide the two children from the side of the master of Fu-I. Whether they lived or died was also decided by the lady alone. However, he was just a guest who came to the Duke's mansion by chance. According to his estimation, he would not stay here for too long. Teaching those young children here now was just a boring act. What the fate of the two children would be in the future would not involve him and had nothing to do with him. He did not have the kind of compassion that was overflowing to the point of being unnecessary. Because he had seen too many similar things. Of course, as long as he stayed in the Duke's mansion for another day, he could give the two children some preferential treatment within his ability. For example, the middle-aged man leaned forward slightly and looked at the two children in front of him. "Didn't I tell you? If you want to listen to the class, just go into the classroom and sit down. No need to stay outside and eavesdrop." One of the little kids answered in a baby voice, "No, we are the children of servants. We can't go to class with those other children in the classroom." The middle-aged man looked at him patiently. "Then let your brother squat outside with you? Children squat for a long time and they will not grow tall," the little kid said. "As a matter of course, I didn't want to come in the first place, but he insisted on coming to listen. The implication is that as long as the younger brother doesn't come, he won't squat outside, so if anyone is to blame, it should be the younger brother." The middle-aged man couldn't help laughing and said, "You don't like to study so much? Be careful that you will be illiterate when you grow up." The little boy said seriously, "What do we need to learn for children of servants? Isn't it enough to know how to do the work?" The middle-aged man subconsciously wanted to refute, but then he thought that the child in front of him was just a 4-year-old child, so there was nothing to worry about, so he just said, "It's always good to learn more." The little boy also agreed, "Yes, so I brought my brother here." The middle-aged man suddenly felt that the little boy in front of him gave him an illusion that he couldn't resist, as if he was talking to someone of the same age as himself. He looked at the innocent and silly face of the little boy in front of him. Sure enough, the illusion was still an illusion. So the middle-aged man turned his attention to the other little kid who was silent next to him. "So Yu Hao, did you understand everything I said today?" The little kid nodded obediently. "I understood everything." The middle-aged man touched his head. "That's good. If you don't understand anything, be sure to ask me." The little kid nodded. "Okay." As soon as Yu Hao finished speaking, the little kid next to him pulled his hand and said to the middle-aged man, "Okay, today's class is over, and we should go back. Goodbye, teacher." Yu Hao, who was being dragged, also hurriedly said goodbye, teacher, to the middle-aged man, and then let the little kid pull him away. The middle-aged man watched the two little kids go away, shook his head gently, and walked away with his hands behind his back. The two little kids who left the courtyard did not run anymore, but walked slowly. Along the way, Xiao Doubting did not forget to say earnestly to Yu Hao beside him, "That teacher, you must not talk too much to him, Yu Hao. Be careful that he will kidnap you without anyone noticing one day, and then you will never see me and my mother again. Don't be fooled by him just because he looks like a good person." As he talked, Xiao Doubting began to talk about the horror of human traffickers and the terrible fate of children who were kidnapped by human traffickers. Yu Hao, who was only 4 years old, was still very much fooled by this and was scared into submission. Although this was not the first time, he still promised very well that he would never talk too much to the middle-aged man. Even though he had nagged him many times, he was still a little worried. However, after all, although the teacher seemed a little suspicious to him, at least he had not shown any abnormality at present, so he could not say more and could only stop at that point. After sorting out his thoughts, he turned to Yu Hao beside him and said, "Are you hungry?" Yu Hao pursed his lips, rubbed his stomach aggrievedly, nodded, and said him softly. He took Yu Hao's hand. "Then let's go, I'll take you to find something to eat." He led people to the back kitchen with a clear goal. It was obvious that this was not the first time he did this. Walking on the road, thinking about the current situation of his family, he couldn't help but feel a little melancholy. This is the White Tiger Duke's mansion of the Xingluo Empire. It is the place where he and Yu Hao were born and lived for 4 years. Except for the first 2 years, their family's life is now extremely bad. 2 years ago, the White Tiger Duke went out to fight on behalf of the Xingluo Empire, and the jurisdiction of the Duke's mansion fell to the Duchess. As a result, their family was driven to the current servant's residence by the Duchess, and all financial sources were cut off. Usually, they could only occasionally help out to exchange a little money and food to make a living. But how could that little food be enough for a sick mother and 2 boys to live healthily? So after he was 2 years old, he began to learn to sneak into the kitchen, find some food to fill Yu Hao's stomach, and bring some back to his mother who was in poor health. At first, he was not skilled, and was discovered by the servant several times. He could only run around in panic to avoid the servants chasing him. But fortunately, he also maintained the most basic calmness and chose to run out of the Duke's mansion and enter the woods outside, using the woods to avoid the people chasing him. Logically, a child like him could never outrun those strong adults. But the fact is a bit outrageous. In the end, he was always able to avoid the pursuit of the servants, and then climbed over a wall outside the Duke's mansion, holding the stolen food in his arms and rushing home. Later, he became skilled, and every time he went to the kitchen to steal food, it was difficult for the servants to find him. And those servants were even more outrageous. After being stolen by him so many times, they didn't come up with any countermeasures. Later, he dared to take Yu Hao directly, and then safely took the food and Yu Hao home. Chapter 383 Life. For example, now, he asked Yu Hao to hide under the window outside the back kitchen, and then he walked in through the main door. Since the Duchess began to suppress their family, the servants under the Duchess also began to oppress their family. But in the huge Duke's mansion, there are still some servants who are not under the Duchess, and his advantage is that he barely gained the sympathy of these people. As soon as he entered the door, someone cast a disgusted and contemptuous look at him. He turned a blind eye to this and walked straight to a servant who was cutting vegetables inside. He put his hands behind his back and looked shy. "Uncle, is there anything I can help you with today?" The person cutting vegetables looked down at him and smiled softly. "Yuan Zai's here? Let me think. Can you help me bring the basin over there to me first? But there are a lot of things in it. Can you carry it?" He quickly straightened his chest. "Of course, I can definitely carry it." After that, he hurriedly ran to the iron basin, rolled up his sleeves, and tentatively lifted it. "It's very heavy." But he still gritted his teeth, lifted the iron basin with great difficulty, and turned to walk towards the man who was cutting vegetables. In the back kitchen, several people had already set their sights on him. They were the ones who were on guard against him stealing things from the back kitchen. His expression did not change, and he still looked a little tired. But when he passed a stove, he took advantage of the fact that the side of those people was blocked and tilted the iron basin in his hand slightly. Then, a piece of bread on the edge of the iron basin slipped into his sleeve quietly. He quickened his pace, walked in front of the man who was cutting vegetables, and lifted the iron basin with all his strength. "Uncle, take it quickly, I can't hold it any more." As he said this, the bread in his sleeve rolled into the depths of his sleeve, In order to make it easier to steal food, he specially changed his clothes to the current appearance. After the man who was cutting vegetables took the basin, he pretended to pat his arm, showing that he was very sore, but in fact he used this action to hide the piece of bread in his sleeve in a pocket on his chest. After hiding, he casually asked, "Uncle, what are you cooking for today?" The man who was cutting vegetables replied, "It's all the same, steamed buns, dumplings, and steamed cornbread, but there are 2 meat buns left today. I'll give you one later, you can take it home and eat it," he immediately said with joy and excitement. "Thank you, Uncle. What else can I do for you?" Then, an impatient voice came from the back kitchen. "Hey, come here and help me bring that basket of vegetables." He first looked at the man who called him, and then looked at the uncle who was cutting vegetables. The uncle who was cutting vegetables said to him, "Go." He then walked over and took down a basket of green vegetables on the table. "Do you want those vegetables?" He pointed to the vegetables on the other parts of the table and said. The man took a quick look and said impatiently, "Bring them all here." He began to put the vegetables into the basket in a humble manner. But what no one saw was that there were 2 fewer steamed buns on the plate above. He walked towards the man with the basket of vegetables and put the basket at his feet. The man pushed him and said, Okay, go away quickly. Don't stand here and dirty my eyes." He took a few steps back, then sat down on the ground, and quickly stood up, patted the dust on his clothes, and walked to the side of the uncle who was cutting vegetables without saying a word. The uncle who was cutting vegetables looked at the man with dissatisfaction. "You are always competing with a child, is it fun?" The man sneered, "You'd better be careful about yourself, if the lady knows." The uncle who was cutting vegetables interrupted him, "I think the lady must be tolerant enough, after all, it's just a child." The man sneered and said nothing, and continued to do what he was doing. The vegetable chopping uncle sighed, took out a raw GMO and handed it to him, then touched his head and said, "Yunzet, that's it for today. You should go home first, and take this raw GMO back to eat." He carefully put the raw GMO in his arms, and then thanked the vegetable chopping uncle. "Uncle, thank you." The vegetable chopping uncle patted his shoulder lightly. Go. He quickly ran out of the kitchen with the raw GMO in his arms, and first made sure that no one was following him, and then went to find Yu Hao who was squatting under the window outside. He took out the raw GMO and handed it to Yu Hao. "Eat it quickly, today is raw GMO. Eat as much as you can. If it's not enough, I still have 2 steamed buns and a piece of bread." Although he is still young and can't take much, Yu Hao is not very old and doesn't eat much, so every time he takes out something from the kitchen, Yu Hao can basically eat enough. If it's really not enough, he can just sneak into the kitchen and take some more. Meat was very rare for them, so Yu Hao seemed to be eating voraciously. He watched Yu Hao biting the raw GMO and swallowing it, and hesitated for a long time, but he didn't say leave some for mom. He was just a 4-year-old child. He just sighed silently in his heart, patted Yu Hao's back gently, and said to him, "Eat slowly, don't choke." Then he led him home. Yu Hao ate as he walked, and seemed to be completely immersed in the raw GMO. But in the end, he only ate 1/3 of the raw GMO, and stopped reluctantly. He looked at Yu Hao in confusion. "Why don't you eat it?" Yu Hao handed the raw GMO to him. "Brother, eat it too, and leave some for mom." Yu Hao looked at him with bright blue eyes. Brother has always done this. He stared at Yu Hao's still very tender face for a long time, and finally said with a smile, "Brother is not hungry, so I won't eat. If you want to leave some for mom, then eat your share." Yu Hao frowned. "Brother, you are lying, I can hear your stomach growling." Then he put the raw GMO to his mouth in a rather arrogant manner. "Brother, eat it." He could only keep saying that he was not hungry, but in the end he couldn't persuade Yu Hao, so he could only compromise and take the raw GMO. "Okay, I'll have a bite." He broke off a small piece from the raw GMO that was only 1/3 left, and there was only a little bit of meat on it. He stared at it for a long time before putting it into his mouth. When the meat aroma filled his mouth, he felt a little speechless. It had been a long time since he tasted the taste of meat again. And it was just a tiny bit of meat crumbs. He chewed the small piece of raw GMO repeatedly in his mouth for a long time, until it became a paste that was almost liquid, and was swallowed by his body instinctively. The meaty aroma had long disappeared. But his brain was still constantly savoring the taste. He didn't know what kind of mood he was in now, but he just felt that life was really fucking hard. Chapter 384 Dai Yuns. In front of him was a dilapidated woodshed. I'm afraid no one would have thought that such a shabby place would be a home that some people who were struggling in life regarded as a treasure, and a place where a lonely mother and 2 young children could barely rely on to avoid the wind and rain. When Dai-Yun realized that he had traveled through time and became a baby, he was already 1 year old in this world. At first, he had a life of luxury. But just 1 year later, he came to live in the current woodshed, relying on his mother and his brother of the same age. At first, the sudden change in the situation made him a little unresponsive. Until one day, when he and his brother only ate a steamed bun together all day, and his mother had not eaten a drop of water, he realized that he had to do something to prevent himself and his brother from starving to death. Especially when he saw servants in the mansion summon an axe out of thin air one day, and thus connected his brother's name, and knew what kind of worldview he was in now, he dared not neglect it. Since then, for a long time, he has been thinking and practicing how to make his brother full and grow up healthier. Because the only chance for their family to turn things around basically depends on his brother. Of course, he should be able to do it as he has the same blood as his brother, but he is a variable in this world after all, and he himself is not sure what kind of martial soul he will awaken at the age of 6. If it is the evil-eyed white tiger martial soul that is inherited from the white tiger duke, then it would be fine. Then he can lead his family to turn things around without relying on his brother, so that the Duchess can no longer oppress them. But this kind of thing is too much of a matter of luck, and he dare not gamble. Moreover, although the martial soul that his brother awakened in the end was not the evil-eyed white tiger, it was also the top-eye body martial soul. In the original work, the reason why the younger brother was still oppressed so badly was because his innate soul power was only level 1 when he awakened his martial soul. But the original work also said that the reason why his younger brother only had the innate level 1 soul power when his martial soul awakened was because his body was too weak to withstand the full soul power brought by the top body martial soul eyes, so in the end he only showed level 1 soul power. Then, as long as he ensured that his younger brother could grow up to 6 years old in good health, when his younger brother finally awakened his martial spirit, would he be able to increase his spirit power by several levels? He did not ask for the innate full spirit power, which was too illusory. As long as he could increase his spirit power by 3 or 4 levels, he believed that for the Duke's mansion, his younger brother would also be a spirit master worth cultivating. This was what Dai-Yun's wanted. As long as his younger brother could be favored, and with their original identities, he believed that their family would definitely be able to get out of the current situation. So Dai-Yun's learned to steal food in the kitchen, and would urge his younger brother to go running every day. And of course, listen to the middle-aged man's lectures every day. The middle-aged man did not tell the children in the mansion about the history of Douluo continent every day, but more often taught those children to read and recognize characters. Dai-Yun took his younger brother to listen to the lectures just to let his younger brother recognize more characters. However, when the middle-aged man began to contact them, he became alert. Although he couldn't say it, he subconsciously felt that the middle-aged man was not a good person. So he and his younger brother had prepared a statement in advance, asking his younger brother to talk less to the middle-aged man, and at the same time insisted in front of the middle-aged man that they were just children of servants. Even though he was a little worried that the middle-aged man might be bad for his younger brother, he insisted on taking his younger brother to attend classes every day in order to ensure that his younger brother's education would not fall behind. Anyway, he was worried about his younger brother's future. However, seeing that his younger brother seemed to be growing faster recently, he felt that it was time to expand his younger brother's diet. In the past, after he was discovered stealing food from the kitchen, he ran to hide in the woods outside the Duke's mansion, and then found a small river, which should have a lot of fish. Thinking of this, Dai-Yun couldn't help but smile in his heart. It's time to start training Yu Hao's grilled fish skills. Looking at his younger brother who was concentrating on eating steamed buns next to him, he sighed softly. 2 years. The last 2 years. If it succeeds, then everything now will be over. But if it still doesn't work, then he really has no way out. Dai-Yun took the rao jiamo, a steamed bun, that his brother had bitten off by 1/3 and broke off a small piece, and led his brother, who was munching on the steamed bun, into their current home. As expected, their mother was already waiting for them at home. On the tattered wooden table were 3 broken porcelain bowls, with rice porridge and soup that you couldn't see how much rice there was. In addition to these 3 bowls of porridge, their daily meals only consisted of a few wild vegetables picked by their mother from outside. Very occasionally, there might be a steamed bun or a steamed cornbread. The Duchess, who had the final say in the Duke's mansion, was too oppressive on them. Their mother could only help the servants wash clothes in exchange for some meager travel expenses, which was also the only source of income for their family. Their mother was absolutely not allowed to step into places like the back kitchen, and no one would give her a job to earn some food to feed her 2 children. The money their mother earned from washing clothes often had to be saved for several days before they could exchange it for a shriveled steamed bun or a steamed cornbread from the people in the kitchen. When their family was first driven here, Dai-yun's had not had time to change from a life of luxury, and he just waited for his mother to feed him every day like his brother. Until one day, his mother did not get any food, and the only food for the 3 of them was half a steamed cornbread. At that time, he looked at his haggard mother, coaxing his hungry brother to sleep, with sores on her hands from washing clothes for others in winter, but she was still gentle and told them with a smile, "Baby, bear it for a while, okay? Mom will bring you something to eat tomorrow morning." Undoubtedly, their mother was very strong. Even in such a difficult situation, she was not defeated. But such a strong mother, after hearing her brother's sleep talk after he fell asleep, could no longer hold back, hugged his thin body tightly, and tears kept falling from her eyes. He still remembers what his brother said at that time, "Mom, when will we be able to eat our fill of Wow Tao?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385 2 years. Then early the next morning, their mother went to the kitchen alone, knelt there, and finally begged for a full meal for them. He still remembered the gentle smile on his mother's face when she looked at them, and remembered that his mother gently told his brother who was eating voraciously to eat slowly and not to choke accidentally. He also remembered that his mother also told him to eat quickly. But he also remembered how hard it was for him to swallow the food. He looked at his mother who hardly touched the food on the table, and felt that every bite he took on the food would give rise to a very strong emotion called guilt in his heart. It was those emotions that made him feel that the food was hard to swallow after being hungry for a whole day. That was the first and most intuitive time for Dai-yuns to truly feel the true meaning of the saying women are weak, but they are strong as mothers. It was from then on that he changed and began to try to steal food from the kitchen, just to prevent the situation that day from happening again. It must be said that after crossing over to this world, he has always felt a little alienated from this world, and he doesn't seem to have much feeling for his current mother. After all, he still knows in his heart that his real mother is not on this world. But after that time, he has completely accepted his current mother in his heart, and the identity of the mother to him. Before crossing over, there were not many descriptions of his mother in the novel. After crossing over, he realized what kind of suffering it was. His only wish now is to help their family get rid of this suffering. Fortunately, everything seems to be going well for now. In any case, their family will no longer be in the situation of not having anything to eat all day. Even if the kitchen cannot be entered, they still have the river. Their mother, Ho-yuner, immediately put on a gentle and loving smile on her haggard face after seeing the 2 of them. "Yuns, Yu-heo, are you back? Come and eat." Then, Ho-yuner saw the steamed bun that Yu-heo was chewing wildly in his hand, and her eyes turned to Dai-yuns. "Yuns, did you go to the kitchen again?" Dai-yuns had tried to hide it before, but failed, so he could only tell the truth. Yes, in Ho-yuner's opinion, Dai-yuns went to the kitchen and was able to get food. He must have been bullied by those people in the kitchen. As a mother, she definitely didn't want to see that. However, it was precisely because of the food that Dai-yuns brought back from time to time that their family was able to survive until now, and even Yu-heo could eat his fill every time. She also wanted Dai-yuns not to go to the kitchen again, and wanted to say to Dai-yuns, "Mom can take good care of you too," but she also understood that she couldn't do it. So, in the end, she just sighed softly, stroked Dai-yuns' hair, and said, "Don't work too hard on yourself, you are only 4 years old. If you are wrong there, come and tell your mother, and your mother will vent your anger for you." Dai-yuns responded with a smile on his face. Then he handed the remaining rao jiamo to her, feeling a little embarrassed. Yu-heo ate a little first, and it was a little ugly. "But Mom, this is what Yu-heo left for you." Ho-yuner looked at the rao jiamo and knew that her eldest son only ate a small bite, so she couldn't help but say, "Mom doesn't eat this, you eat it yourself. Look how thin you are." and Yu Hao has almost grown taller than you recently. Dayun's didn't compromise like this, but took a step back cleverly. Then Mom, let's each have half, otherwise it will all be eaten by my brother. After saying that, he broke the Rao Jiamo in his hand and handed the piece that he hadn't broken before to Hoyuner. Eat it quickly, Mom, or it will get cold. Hoyuner sighed, and finally took the half of the Rao Jiamo that was obviously a circle larger than the one in Dayun's hand. Dayun looked at her. Eat it quickly, Mom. Hoyuner, who couldn't persuade her eldest son, finally took a bite of the Rao Jiamo in her hand. Dayun laughed, and then quickly stuffed the remaining half of the Rao Jiamo in his hand into the mouth of Yu Hao next to him. Yu Hao was stunned for just a moment, and then ate the remaining Rao Jiamo with a smack of his lips. Hoyuner had no time to stop him, and could only look at Dayun with a smile on his face and Yu Hao, who was eating Rao Jiamo crazily. All the complicated thoughts in her heart finally turned into a light sigh. However, just wait for 2 more years. Just these last 2 years. If her sons can awaken their father's martial spirit, then her children will not have to accompany her to suffer like this. But the mother still can't help but worry. What if both children fail to awaken their father's martial spirit? What will happen next? Moreover, her health is getting worse and worse. What if she suddenly passes away one day? What will happen to her 2 children? Will there be someone who loves them as much as she loves them? Life is so ruthless, even more ruthless than the most fair and strict judge in the world. But no matter how unpleasant life is, as long as people don't want to die, they have to grit their teeth and continue to pursue life. 2 years, under Dayun's day and night prayers, finally passed slowly. Tomorrow is the day for the children who are 6 years old this year in the Duke's mansion to perform the martial soul awakening ceremony. And everything that Dayun has been looking forward to and hoping for in the past 2 years will be revealed tomorrow. The days of these 2 years are the same as before. He still goes to the kitchen from time to time to take some things out. However, since he grew up, he can take out more things, and no longer just take food. Sometimes, there will be some rapeseeds left in the kitchen, and he will also take them out of the kitchen quietly and plant them by the river in the woods outside the Duke's mansion. Over time, their family can not only eat fresh fish, but also those fresh vegetables. In addition, there are many edible wild fruits in the woods, so their family has basically achieved self-sufficiency. In short, it was visible to the naked eye that Hoyuner's face was less sad, and she was not as haggard as before, and she began to smile more often. At the same time, since there was enough food for the time being, Dayun no longer had to deliberately share his food with Yu Hao as much as possible like before. After being able to eat his fill, Dayun was no longer as pale and thin as he was 2 years ago. Yu Hao was also kept healthy by him. Although he was not as fat as those rich kids, he was at least as healthy as those children from ordinary families. Chapter 386 Madam Hoyuner still makes some money by doing laundry for others, but since she doesn't have to worry about food, she can save the money for emergencies. That evening, the 3 of them caught a lot of fish by the river outside the Duke's mansion, and only returned home to rest after Yu Hao had eaten his fill. But at night, Dayun couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard he tried while lying on the bed. Yu Hao, who was lying next to him, was different. He slept in a big shape, with a quilt covering only his belly and 1 foot raised. Thinking about the awakening of his martial soul tomorrow, on the one hand, he was full of expectations for Yu Hao, but he had to admit that there was still a trace of worry in his heart that occupied a lot of space. On the other hand, he was also extremely curious about what kind of martial soul he would awaken, and whether that martial soul would bring him soul power. These thoughts that kept circling in his mind made him fall asleep late at night. But his mind still didn't seem to want to stop, and it kept weaving different dreams for him, all of which were about tomorrow's martial soul awakening ceremony. The next morning, it was Hoyuner who woke him up from the endless dream, and he seemed a little sluggish due to insufficient sleep. Compared with him, Yu Hao seemed a little energetic. During breakfast, he kept talking to him about the upcoming martial soul awakening ceremony, and expressed his curiosity about what martial soul he would awaken. Of course, he was also curious about whether the martial soul would bring him soul power. Dayun ate breakfast listlessly, thinking that his curiosity last night was redundant. If he had known, he would have thought about everything after waking up this morning like Yu Hao. But in short, the martial soul awakening ceremony that he had been waiting for 4 years finally came. After breakfast, Hoyuner took the two brothers and walked towards the palace in the Duke's mansion, where children of appropriate age could awaken their martial souls. The night before the martial soul awakening ceremony, the most luxurious palace in the Duke's mansion is the main hall, where guests are received on weekdays. In the huge palace, groups of maids stand respectfully on both sides of the hall. Some hold round fans, and some carry fruits and snacks. And the person they serve is the charming and bright woman who sits lazily in the first seat of the main hall. This woman with picturesque eyebrows and dignified demeanor is the Duchess. At this time, the lady is checking an important document from the White Tiger Duke on the front line of the battlefield. The annual martial soul awakening ceremony is here again. As the real master of the Duke's mansion, although the White Tiger Duke is not in the mansion, he still cares about everything in the Duke's mansion. In the document, in addition to asking her if she is well recently, the White Tiger Duke also asked her to pay attention to this year's martial soul awakening ceremony. If any of the children in the mansion awakens a good martial soul and has good cultivation talent, she must report it to him in time, and at the same time, she must cultivate it well and not be stingy with the resources in the mansion for this. In the future, maybe she can provide Luo with some amazing soul masters. After reading it, the lady also remembered that it seemed that two children had just reached the age of awakening their martial spirits this year. After a pause, she immediately asked someone to find the servants in charge of tomorrow's martial spirit awakening ceremony and asked for the list of children who would participate in the awakening ceremony tomorrow. At a glance, the lady found two names that she felt a little dazzling from the more than 10 names. Thinking of the maid named Hoyuner, she only felt a burst of discomfort. Yes, as a close maid who grew up with the Duke of White Tiger, Hoyuner can be said to be extremely favored by the Duke of White Tiger. Then it is not so strange that this maid gave birth to two sons for him. It's just a pity that giving birth to a child for the Duke of White Tiger should be more of an unfortunate thing for a maid. When the Duke of White Tiger was still in the mansion, she couldn't do anything, and could only watch the three of them, mother and son, enjoy the glory and wealth in the mansion. But since the Duke of White Tiger went to the front line to fight, she can do a lot about it. She drove the mother and her two children to the servants' area on the pretext that Hoyuner was infected with an infectious disease, and ordered the servants to suppress them as much as possible. She thought that Hoyuner would simply take her two children away from the Duke's mansion because she could not bear the pressure. In that case, she could send someone to quietly make the mother and her two children disappear from this world completely, and no one would suspect her. However, the maid was not stupid. Even though life in the Duke's mansion was difficult, she did not choose to leave. She should have thought of this. So she hoped that she would eventually die because she could not bear the pressure. But she did not expect that the maid could still hold on with the two children until now. She held on until the two children's martial spirits awakened. As the Duchess, she also knew that if after the martial spirit awakening ceremony, the two boys, as long as one of them awakened the inherited martial spirit in the Duke's mansion, she would have to report the two children to the White Tiger Duke no matter how reluctant she was. And once that happened, everything she had done in the past few years would become a bubble. She wanted to eliminate all factors that might affect her children in the future, so she suppressed the mother and her two children. If Hoyuner returned to her original status because the two children awakened the inherited martial spirit of the White Tiger Duke, she could not accept it. She had to do something. The lady held her chin and tapped the table with her fingertips. In the end, she just said to the servant who sent the list of children to participate in the awakening ceremony, "Tomorrow, let the person in charge of the ceremony keep a close eye on these two evil offspring." Then, she asked the maid to help her back to her room. But after leaving the main hall, she changed direction temporarily and came to a small square in the center of the Duke's mansion, and then drove away all the maids and followers. The lady walked to the stone tablet in the center of the small square and looked up at the countless mysterious characters engraved on it. She said to herself, "Tell me, what will happen tomorrow, in the hall where the martial spirit awakening ceremony was held?" More than a dozen children participating in the ceremony lined up neatly, waiting for relevant personnel to awaken their martial spirits. Daiyuns and Yu Hao were at the end of the line. Unlike Yu Hao, who was looking ahead with curiosity, Daiyuns looked a little anxious at the moment. After all, their future fate would depend on the martial soul awakening ceremony in a while. Although there were more than a dozen children in front of them, it was probably not a very time-consuming thing to awaken a martial soul for a child. "Sorry for being late. It's been almost 2 months, and the dog author just rushed here. I'm really sorry, Kak." Speaking of saving manuscripts, The dog author is indeed saving manuscripts, but the manuscripts are all saved in the British and American magazines. There are only more than 10,000 words on Douluo. I'm ashamed. There should have been a guaranteed 5 chapters in June, but the author had the final exam, so it was not published, and it was delayed until now. The consequence of not writing Douluo for too long is that I can't write a few words even after holding back for a long time, so I have been adjusting from the beginning of July to now, and finally I can write smoothly today. Finally, let's talk about the setting of this pre-plot of Douluo. Well, Dai-yun's traveled through time and became Yu Hao's brother. Originally he was still the younger brother. The author originally wanted to name him Dai-yunlin. Yu is opposite to Yun, Hao is opposite to Lan, and Haolin just happens to be a homophone for Haolin, which directly points out the main theme and the meaning of the title, Bushi. But later he suddenly thought that being younger seemed to be a good choice, so he did this. So the protagonist of this book has changed? No. So where did Tang Liu die? We will know in 2 or 3 chapters at most. Chapter 387 Ceremony. Moreover, according to his observation, there seemed to be more than one person responsible for awakening the martial spirits for the children in this temple. They didn't even have to wait for long. The next moment, they saw the children in front of them move. The 3 children at the front of the team walked towards the 3 stone platforms built in the center of the temple. Each stone platform was engraved with a soul guide array that could transmit soul power. At the same time, there was a crystal ball that should be able to test the level of soul power placed on the edge of the stone platform. It was made of unknown materials. Under the instruction of the 3 soul masters responsible for awakening the martial spirits under the stone platform, the 3 children stood in the center of the soul guide array on the stone platform and reached out to touch the crystal ball in front of them. Then, the soul masters standing under the stone platform released their martial spirits and began to inject soul power into the stone platform. Dai-yun stared at them intently and found that the 3 soul masters were surrounded by at least 3 circles of soul rings. The one standing in the middle was surrounded by 4 circles of soul rings, and it was the best ratio of 2 yellow and 2 purple. Dai-yun quietly said to Yu Hao in front of him, "When it's your turn later, go to the stone platform in the middle." Yu Hao didn't know why, but he listened to Dai-yun's words very much, nodded, and said crisply, "Okay." At the same time, the 3 children standing on the stone platform began to change physically. The ears of 2 children gradually turned into animal ears, and another child raised his right hand, and then a somewhat illusory knife appeared on it. This is the phenomenon of successful martial soul awakening. Then, the crystal ball in front of the 3 children gradually lit up, and then formed a number of light and shadow on it. Because it was far away, Dai-yun couldn't see the numbers on the crystal ball clearly. And the 3 soul masters responsible for awakening the martial souls didn't seem to plan to loudly say the martial souls and soul power levels of the 3 children. But then, the 3 soul masters opened their mouths and probably said something to the 3 children on the stone platform. Then, the 3 children walked down the stone platform and walked to the middle-aged man who was sitting behind the desk next to them when they came in. It seemed that they were going to register. Dai-yun was no stranger to the middle-aged man, the teacher who had been teaching the children in the mansion. If Dai-yun remembered correctly, his surname should be Luo. As for the specific name, he didn't seem to mention it. But as far as he knew, the middle-aged man just happened to be a guest in the Duke's mansion for a while when he was traveling around the continent, but he had been a guest for almost 4 years and had not left yet. Therefore, Dai-yun would suspect that the middle-aged man might have ulterior motives. However, the other party has not shown anything yet. But it is precisely because he has not shown anything yet that Dai-yun does not need to worry too much for the time being. At present, the martial soul awakening ceremony is the most important. The team moved forward quickly, and Yu Hao and Dai-yun were getting closer and closer to the 3 stone platforms. As the distance gradually narrowed, Dai-yun could gradually see the numbers displayed on the 3 crystal balls on the stone platform. He didn't know about the children in front, but the children behind all had accompanying innate soul power, and none of them were lower than level 3. However, there are still 2 or 3 whose martial souls are quite weak. It is obvious that they can only cultivate to the level of a great soul master at best. Finally, there are only 4 children left in the team. In other words, Yu Hao will be the next one to awaken his martial soul. And Dai-yun will be the last one to awaken his martial soul. Although he is the only one left in the end, Dai-yun doesn't care about it. He just reminds Yu Hao again and asks him to go to the one in the middle. Dayun's, of course, it doesn't matter if you don't go to the stone platform in the middle. Just go to the empty stone platform, Yu Hao, okay? Just as the two brothers were whispering to each other, the middle-aged man who was sitting behind the table and registering the martial soul and soul power information for the children who had awakened their martial souls suddenly stopped writing. He smiled at the confused child standing in front of the table, then stretched and said to a servant standing next to him, "I'm a little tired sitting here, how about you help me complete the rest of the registration work?" Seeing the servant turned his head and looked at him, he smiled and added, "After all, people are old, and sitting on such a hard chair for a long time will make their waist stiff." The servant didn't say anything, but just walked over. The middle-aged man stood up and gave his seat to the servant, then walked straight to the 3 stone platforms with his hands behind his back. He stood by and watched for a while, watching the 3 children who had just stepped onto the stone platform slowly release their martial spirits under the cleansing of soul power, and then continued to test their soul power. These 3 children all have the most ordinary martial spirits, and their innate soul power is not more than level 5, so they are basically worthless to cultivate. He shook his head slightly, and then cast his eyes on the children who were still waiting in line at the back. Especially Yu Hao and Dayun's at the end of the team. Coincidentally, when he turned his eyes over, he also found that the little guy named Dayun's at the end of the team had just turned his head away. It seemed that before, when he was still concentrating on observing the situation of a child on the stone platform, someone had already been staring at him intently. Or, it had started from earlier. The middle-aged man gradually raised the corners of his lips. That little guy was really interesting. Dayun's couldn't guess the middle-aged man's psychological activities, and he had no time to guess now. Although he didn't know why the other party suddenly stopped the registration work, even if he had ulterior motives, there was no reason to interrupt the awakening ceremony, not to mention that this was still in the Duke's mansion. As long as the middle-aged man didn't interrupt Yu Hao's martial soul awakening ceremony, Dayun's didn't care what he wanted to do. And finally, it was Yu Hao's turn to hold the martial soul ceremony. Although the team had a sequence, the 3 stone platforms were chosen at will by the children who came to participate in the ceremony. So when Yu Hao rushed to the stone platform in the middle first, no one came out to stop him. The other 2 children also walked towards the remaining 2 stone platforms. After seeing this scene, the middle-aged man smiled slightly, and then looked at Dayun's meaningfully, but found that the other party had already walked forward a few steps, looking nervously at Yu Hao on the stone platform, and his hands couldn't help but tightly grasp the corner of his clothes. The smile on the middle-aged man's face deepened a little. But the next moment, it was put away again, because the door of this palace was suddenly opened, and then, the lady walked in surrounded by several maids. Chapter 388 Right or Wrong. Since the door opened with a loud noise, everyone in the hall looked over there. The martial soul awakening ceremony that Yu Hao and the other 2 children were about to start was temporarily stopped. Yu Hao on the stone platform turned around curiously and looked towards the door. At a glance, he saw the delicate and beautiful woman standing in front of several maids. Although Yu Hao had never seen this woman before, he still knew that this woman who looked elegant and noble was the mistress of the Duke's mansion, the wife of the Duke of White Tiger, the Duchess. Even though Yu Hao was only 6 years old and had Dayun's, his brother, to protect him in the past few years, it did not mean that he was a naive child who knew nothing. On the contrary, he knew very well. He knew that this elegant woman in front of him was the culprit who caused their family to end up like this. Adults said that children would not remember what happened when they were young. But Yu Hao remembered everything. Since the day he opened his eyes, he remembered everything clearly. He knew that the reason why his family was hungry and poorly clothed was all because of this duchess. Because of jealousy, because she was jealous of her mother Hoyuner. Because of her 2 children, because her 2 children had the same blonde hair and blue eyes as the White Tiger Duke, the same pupils as the White Tiger Duke, and the same martial spirit as the White Tiger Duke. Because he was also the White Tiger Duke's child. Even though he had never seen his biological father since he was born. The only impression he had of his father was the shadow that his mother often carved on the ground with a branch. At first, he would stare at the shadow drawn on the ground like his mother, praying that this man who was his father would come and save their family from the dire straits. But later, from his brother's attitude, he also vaguely realized that perhaps this man who was his father would never come to save them. So after that, that expectation gradually faded. But children are children after all. Even if his brother clearly told him that he didn't have to hate the Duchess who had harmed them like this, and didn't have to hate the White Tiger Duke for it, he just couldn't control the resentment in his heart. He asked his brother why. His brother told him, because the love between our mother and Duke Behu was a mistake in this era. Love should be blessed, not to mention that Duke Behu fell in love with our mother first. But in this era, few people will sincerely bless such love. What's more, mother got pregnant with you and me later. The young Yu Hao couldn't understand his brother's words, so he could only ask why, and then remember every word his brother said firmly in his heart. There is a huge difference in class between our mother and Duke Behu. Duke Behu is a great general in this country, and mother is just one of his personal maids. Even though they grew up together and must have each other in their hearts, a duke is a duke after all, and a maid can only be a maid. If they really get together, if Duke Behu really wants mother to become a duchess, do you think the previous Duke Behu would agree? Duke Behu is once just the son of a duke. If the son of a duke is with a maid, the duke will lose face if the news gets out. Even if he gets together with mother despite opposition, they will be an unrecognized couple. And the only thing that those who oppose can accept is that Duke Behu will marry a wife of equal status, and our mother can only become a concubine. And the facts have proved that Duke Behu did so, marrying the most beloved youngest daughter of the former Emperor Xingluo, who is now the Duchess. But look at her mother, she doesn't even have a status. Perhaps in the eyes of the White Tiger Duke, our mother is still just his personal maid. So I doubt whether he really loves his mother that much, and whether his mother's deep affection for him is worth it. But Yu Hao, you don't have to hate the White Tiger Duke and the Duchess because of this. Because, as I said, the love between mother and the White Tiger Duke was originally a mistake. And it is understandable that the Duchess would suppress us because she is only doing it for her children, and she is only doing what she thinks is right. It is true that her actions have hurt us, but we are not without a solution. Believe me, I can get our family out of the current situation, so that you don't have to have resentment and hatred towards them in the future. Believe me, I will succeed. In his mind, the words that his brother once said to him echoed. So Yu Hao just watched the Duchess walking quietly, just watching quietly. Then he cast his eyes on his brother below. In order to make it easier to steal food from the back kitchen, his brother once deliberately altered his coarse linen clothes to be very large and loose, which just happened to cover the thin body underneath. He would never forget that when their family was in the most difficult time, his elder brother did everything he could to make him eat more, even at the cost of not eating a single grain of rice himself, just to make him eat enough. And because of this, in the following period of time, his height was obviously taller than his elder brother, and his elder brother looked even thinner than him. Fortunately, later, food gradually became sufficient, and his elder brother got rid of the skinny look of hunger in the past. Think about the first 2 years of their lives, when their family had not been suppressed by the Duchess, how handsome his elder brother was, with black hair like crow feathers and clear blue eyes. He remembered that many maids liked to hug his elder brother at that time. His elder brother was all the imaginations of the young nobleman of a rich family in his mind. But later, the bright and beautiful young master disappeared, leaving only a pale and skinny child who kept making plans for life so that his younger brother and mother could have enough food. But in Yu Hao's eyes, whether it was the bright and beautiful elder brother when he was 1 or 2 years old, or the pale and skinny elder brother later, they were all the most perfect elder brothers in his mind. Even though his brother had never mentioned to him what a method was that could help their family get out of the current situation, he seemed to understand a little bit since he stood on the stone platform that could awaken his martial spirit. In the past, his brother had always taken care of him, and he had never been able to help. Now, perhaps it was time for him to help. No matter what his brother's plan was, in short, he would definitely work hard to meet his brother's expectations. Unfortunately, we all know that expectations should be difficult to achieve. Yu Hao is really miserable. In addition, Dai Yun's words to Yu Hao seemed a little saintly. But he himself was definitely not a saintly person. You will know why after his martial spirit awakens. In the original book, Alex never wanted Yu Hao to have such a great hatred in his heart, because he was afraid that Yu Hao would be controlled by hatred and then led to the wrong path by the magic of the dead. Dai Yun was just trying very hard to make Yu Hao a kind person in the future. Chapter 389 Level 1. Accompanied by the maid, the lady walked to the front of the 3 stone platforms and sat on the soft chair carried by the servants. Her bright phoenix eyes slowly scanned the people in the palace, as if she was looking for something. Then, she looked at the middle-aged man walking towards her. The middle-aged man bowed slightly to the lady. "Hello, Duchess." The lady nodded slightly as a return greeting. "Mr. Luo." Then she asked politely, "I wonder if you are comfortable staying in the mansion." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "The prosperity of this duke's mansion has probably caught up with his Ingluo palace. Why should I feel uncomfortable?" The lady also smiled slightly and said, "It's good that you live comfortably, otherwise my husband will blame me for not entertaining guests well. In addition, I heard that you have been doing some enlightenment education for the children of the servants in recent years. You have worked hard. I would like to thank you on behalf of all the servants." The middle-aged man, who was called Mr. Luo by the lady, waved his hand and shook his head, then said with a smile, "It's a small matter. After all, I can't just eat, drink and live in the mansion for free." The lady smiled and said, "Don't worry, sir, my duke's mansion still has some spare capacity. Of course, I know you have been traveling around in recent years, but if you feel tired, the door of my duke's mansion will always be open to you." Mr. Luo laughed and said with some regret, "Yes, I have been in your house for 4 years. It seems that it is time to continue my travel," Madam said seriously. "Oh? Are you planning to leave?" Mr. Luo did not answer her, but smiled. "This martial soul awakening ceremony is a big event in the lives of children. Why don't we complete the ceremony first?" Madam narrowed her eyes and then smiled. "Okay, I will listen to you." Then, she indicated to continue the martial soul awakening ceremony. The 3 soul masters who received the instructions began to inject soul power into the stone platform. Yu Hao raised his hand to touch the crystal ball in front of him, closed his eyes tightly, felt a warm airflow in his body, felt that the airflow gradually spread to his whole body, and then gathered around his eyes, making him feel warm in his eyes, as if he was covered with a hot towel, very comfortable. Then, he opened his eyes involuntarily under the influence of the heat. What he couldn't see was that there were countless light golden dots flashing in his blue eyes. Unlike the children before, who either had some obvious beast-like features or unconsciously raised their hands and revealed their martial souls as their martial souls awakened, Yu Hao could even be said to have seen nothing happen. But then, the crystal ball in front of him that tested his soul power level gradually lit up, which meant that his soul power had begun to be tested, and it also proved that his martial soul had not failed to awaken, but that his martial soul did not seem to have materialized. Under the stone platform, Dai Yun stared at the crystal ball in front of Yu Hao, nervous and unable to take his eyes off. 4 years of bearing humiliation, 4 years of careful preparation, 4 years of hardship, 4 years of exhaustion, all for this day. He shouted frantically in his heart, "Please, make sure to have a few more levels of soul power." Because he was too focused, he didn't even notice that, in addition to him, the middle-aged man and the Duchess were also staring at the crystal ball, waiting for the result. It was only a matter of a few seconds, but Ayans felt that it was as long as a year. When the light on the crystal ball was about to gather into the shape of a number, he almost shouted out. The blood in his body seemed to have boiled, making him feel a little unbearable heat. There seemed to be a hallucinatory noise in his ears. But the next moment, all the sounds disappeared. In the hall, it sounded a little scary to him. In his body, the boiling blood was cooling down rapidly, and even became a little cold. He felt that his heartbeat seemed to slow down a lot. He thought that his face must look particularly pale now. Even if he didn't deliberately look at a certain person, he still accurately caught a fleeting contempt in those people's eyes. Because the number on the crystal ball basically represents the worst cultivation talent in the Soul Master world. Because the number on the crystal ball is 1. Although he had long realized that even if he worked hard for 4 years, the final result may still not change, but when this moment really came, he still found it difficult to accept. Is fate unchangeable after all? No matter how hard he tries, things that are destined to happen will definitely happen. Right? He felt as if he heard a mocking voice. The voice was saying, "It's not that fate cannot be changed. It's just that you have no power to change it." Powerless, powerless. He was really too powerless. Especially when such a result appeared in front of him. The feeling of powerlessness was even stronger. On the stone platform, Yu Hao's little face was a little pale. He looked around helplessly, looking at the faces of the adults around him. At this moment, it seemed that everyone was looking at him. Even if those people didn't show anything on the surface, under those gazes, he still felt a little uncomfortable and at a loss. Innate soul power. This matter is known to almost everyone in Douluo continent. Yu Hao is no exception. So he also knew that his innate soul power was only level 1. What exactly did that mean? Mr. Luo clicked his tongue and shook his head, saying, "What a pity," Madam asked with interest. "Oh, why do you sigh, Mr. Luo? Is there something special about this child?" Mr. Luo smiled and said, "If I hadn't been knowledgeable in my early years, I would have almost failed to recognize the child's martial soul. But there is no doubt that it is an extremely powerful and top-notch martial soul." Madam put on a posture of listening attentively. "Then what is the martial soul of this child, Mr. Luo?" "It's his eyes. The martial soul of that child is an extremely rare body martial soul, and it is one of the top types of body martial souls, the eyes. It's a pity that the child's innate soul power is only level 1, probably because his body is too weak to fully withstand such a powerful martial soul." Madam sighed, not knowing whether she was sighing or feeling relieved. "That's really a pity. But since his martial soul is eyes, it means that he should be a soul master with spiritual attributes, right? This attribute is very rare, just like soul beasts with spiritual attributes are also rare." Mr. Luo sighed. "Yes, I'm afraid it will be difficult for this child to achieve anything in the future." Madam smiled softly and said in a very low voice, "It is not worth cultivating either, since I write completely at random. I write whatever comes to mind when I write smoothly, so it is not surprising that Dai Yun's martial soul awakening in this chapter has been postponed again." That's it for today. See you tomorrow. Chapter 390 Mr. On the stone platform, the helpless child only knew to follow his instinct at this moment, subconsciously turned around and looked at his brother behind him. His brother was also looking at him, but his expression seemed to be frighteningly pale. Yu Hao was stunned by this, and suddenly a feeling of grievance and shame surged in his heart. Did he disappoint his brother? Dai Yun naturally noticed Yu Hao's every move. Since they were twins, they basically had some thoughts in common, so he could roughly guess Yu Hao's current mental state. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. No, it was definitely not just that. They still had a chance. He looked at Yu Hao on the stone platform, slowly revealed a smile full of encouragement and comfort, and then strode up. He patted Yu Hao on the shoulder and said, "Don't be afraid, you still have your brother." Originally, Yu Hao, who was more mature in mind, could still hold on strongly, but now that he comforted him like this, Yu Hao couldn't help biting his lips tightly, and tears began to well up in his eyes. After a while, he resisted the urge to cry on the spot and nodded heavily. Dai Yun patted his back and said to him, "Wait for me downstairs, we'll go register together." Yu Hao, who had recovered, said in a choked voice, "Okay." Then he walked down the stone platform and stood firmly under the stone platform, looking up at Dai Yun's above. Dai Yun had already faced the crystal ball and put his hand on it. So from Yu Hao's perspective, he could only see his brother's thin back. But at this time, this thin and small back seemed extremely tall to Yu Hao. As long as he stood behind his brother, he would have an incomparable sense of security. Dai Yun clenched his other hand into a fist and looked at the soul master in front of him, waiting for him to awaken his martial soul. But just when the soul master was about to inject soul power into the stone platform, a voice suddenly sounded and stopped him. "Please wait a moment." Dai Yun and the soul master simultaneously looked in the direction where the voice came from. After seeing the person who spoke, Dai Yun's expression changed slightly. Because the person who interrupted was the middle-aged man who was teaching. Mr. Luo smiled and looked at the soul sect and said, "For this last child, why don't you let me perform the martial soul awakening ceremony for him?" The soul sect did not agree immediately, but looked at the wife behind Mr. Luo. After hearing what Mr. Luo said, the wife clenched her palms on the armrest of the soft chair, but her face remained calm. "Sir, are you interested in this child? You want to win over this child?" Mr. Luo smiled and said, "It's almost time for me to leave the Duke's mansion. It's just that before I leave, I have a sudden impulse and want to help this child who suits my eyes complete the martial soul awakening ceremony. Just complete the ceremony for him, and then I will leave." The wife frowned. "Why is this, sir? Why do you do this?" Mr. Luo's smile deepened a little. "I said, it's just that this child suits my eyes more. Don't ask too much." Madam's expression was a little uncertain, but she finally smiled. "Then please, sir, preside over the awakening ceremony for this child." Mr. Luo nodded gently. "Thank you, madam." Then he turned around and walked to the stone platform. The soul master stepped aside and made room for Mr. Luo. Mr. Luo stood in front of the stone platform, looking at Dai Yun, who looked a little unnatural on the stone platform, and smiled meaningfully. Yuns, I don't think I have introduced myself to you properly. Dai Yun smiled. Aren't you the teacher who teaches in the Duke's mansion? Mr. Luo smiled, then lowered his voice. I know, you know I'm not just a teacher. Dai Yuns tried to keep smiling. What do you mean? Mr. Luo snorted lightly. Little guy, don't pretend anymore. I know you have always been wary of me, afraid that I might do something bad to your brother. But don't worry, I have no interest in your brother. Although he has a rare top-level martial soul, with only an innate first-level soul power, he has no future at all. On the contrary, I am more interested in you. Let me think, how old were you when we first met? Were you 2 years old? I should have been. But you, a 2-year-old child, always give me the feeling that I am facing an adult. I always thought it was just my illusion, but after staying here for so long, through the short time I spend with you every day and observing your every move, I choose to believe my feeling. Do you know why I changed my mind? Dai Yuns looked at him without saying a word, his expression not fluctuating at all. Mr. Luo smiled and lowered his voice so that only Dai Yuns in front of him could hear, because even if it is the same person, his soul aura at each age is slightly different. But no matter how different it is impossible for a child of a few years old to have the soul fluctuations of a teenager, Dai Yuns almost exclaimed because of his words. Because, if he has any secrets to keep, it is that he is a time traveler. His soul is indeed not that of a child. And Mr. Luo in front of him has almost dug out his secrets. What exactly does he want to do? Dai Yuns doesn't know, and he can't figure it out. Although he is a time traveler, he doesn't have a golden finger like in the novel, and even his martial soul has not awakened yet. The only thing he can do is to frantically search all the plots of Douluo continent in his mind, trying to find out if there is any character with the surname Luo. But no matter how hard he tried, he still had no impression of a person with the surname Luo. Mr. Luo didn't seem to want to continue to embarrass him, but just put his hand on the place where the soul power was injected into the stone platform. Then he smiled and said to Dai Yuns, my surname is not Luo, but Long. It's just that when I traveled around in recent years, people spread the word that I'm Mr. Luo. Of course, different places have different accents, so it's not surprising that they spread Long as Luo. It just so happens that I can use this to avoid a few people. As for my real name, it's better for you not to know it. Dai Yuns was now extremely nervous, but he still echoed the character surnamed Long in Douluo continent in his mind. However, the more anxious he was, the less he could remember. He only had a vague impression. And when he tried his best to recall that impression, it became even more vague, and he became even more anxious, and immediately fell into a dead loop. Chapter 391 White Tiger. Mr. Luo, oh no, Mr. Long, easily saw through what Dai Yuns was thinking at the moment. He laughed twice and said, little guy, don't be nervous. I am at least a level 90 cultivator. You should feel honored to awaken your martial soul for you. Moreover, no one in the world has ever enjoyed such treatment. You are the first. If it weren't for my curiosity about what your martial soul would be, you wouldn't have this opportunity. As soon as he finished speaking, he injected soul power into the stone platform. The majestic soul power immediately surged out, filtered and guided by the soul guide formation on the stone platform, and all flowed into Dai Yuns' body. Dai Yuns only felt a huge and old airflow pouring into his body, and then his body seemed to be broken by some shackles and became much more relaxed. He closed his eyes involuntarily, somewhat immersed in the feeling that he seemed to be about to fly. However, the moment he closed his eyes, he was somewhat keenly aware of something. It felt to him as if someone had put something on him. He naturally suspected that it was Mr. Long in front of him who did it. But he had no choice. Mr. Long himself said that he had a cultivation base of more than 90 levels. In the world view of Douluo, he was a titled Douluo, the top combat power on the mainland. If this kind of existence really wanted to do something to him, he would have no ability to resist. The only thing he could do was to hope that Mr. Long would really not harm him. And his feeling was extremely bad. Moreover, now, he still had to rely on Mr. Long to help him awaken his martial soul. I just don't know what kind of martial soul he will awaken. At this moment, he didn't even expect to awaken the martial soul of the evil-eyed white tiger. As long as it was a martial soul and could bring him soul power to practice, it would be fine. He just wanted to become stronger now. But this idea only appeared for a moment, and he was suppressed. For now, it is still the most important thing to let Yu Hao and Ho Yuner no longer be trapped by life. So he must awaken the martial soul of the evil-eyed white tiger. After thinking about this, Dai Yun's heart unexpectedly calmed down. And just like that, he began to concentrate on feeling the flow of air in his body. Soon, he found that the airflow in his body almost went through his whole body and finally gathered in his eyes. He couldn't help but feel a little panic. Could it be that his martial soul is also an eye? It seems to be. After all, according to the setting, unless there is a mutation, when awakening the martial soul obtained must come from the father or the mother. Which martial soul will be obtained depends on which of the parents' martial souls is stronger. Obviously, even the evil-eyed white tiger, which is a top east martial soul, is still a little bit worse than the original martial soul eyes. Dai Yun's inevitably felt a little disappointed. But strangely, he didn't have any thoughts of being too depressed, and his mentality was still relatively calm. This state is definitely abnormal, but Dai Yun's didn't understand what was going on at all, so he could only open his eyes with a little confusion. The moment his vision became clear, he saw Mr. Long's slightly surprised expression. Then, he saw the Duchess sitting behind him and the other party's somewhat ugly expression. Except for the Duchess. Everyone else around him also had an expression of disbelief. Just when Dai Yun's was puzzled, Mr. Long in front of him suddenly spoke. Mr. Long's tone was a little surprised. "You have double pupils." Mr. Long seemed to have something to say. Dai Yun's was stunned. What? Although Dai Yun's himself could not see it now, everyone around him could see it clearly. Originally, Dai Yun's was still a skinny little child with black hair and blue eyes. But when the martial spirit awakening ceremony began, his originally thin body actually grew a little taller, and his palms became a little wider. Dark stripes appeared on the exposed skin, and on the forehead, those black stripes formed a king character. Above the king character, there was a black pattern that looked like both a crown and a trident. At the same time, his originally black hair suddenly had a few strands starting from the roots and gradually turned white. When he opened his eyes again, in addition to the golden light in his blue eyes, there was another very obvious feature. Double pupils. It is the unique feature of the evil-eyed white tiger. Most of the people present are from the Duke's mansion, so they all know what this phenomenon means. That's why the lady's face became so ugly. At this time, Dai Yun's also discovered the changes in himself. When he saw the black lines on his arm, he was stunned at first, and then he couldn't help but feel infinite ecstasy in his heart. Yes, it should be. The evil-eyed white tiger martial spirit. Their family can finally no longer suffer the current fate. Dai Yun's, who was in ecstasy, was interrupted by the sudden suction from his hand. He looked over and found that the crystal ball in front of him was gradually lighting up. He gradually calmed down because of this. There is also soul power. He must have soul power. And it can't be low, otherwise with a lady's ability, there is still a chance to conceal his existence. Don't take it lightly. He couldn't help but get a little nervous again. On the side, Mr. Long, who felt that Dai Yun's was getting nervous again, was a little puzzled. As we all know, according to the theory of Master Uzziah Gang 10,000 years ago, the owner of twin martial spirits must be born with full spirit power, and every twin martial spirit owner later confirmed the correctness of this theory, so he really couldn't understand what Dai Yun's was so nervous about. And now, this theory is still correct. The number 10 gradually appeared on the crystal ball. Dai Yun's almost jumped up and cheered on the spot. Now, no matter how powerful the wife is, she can't hide his existence from the White Tiger Duke. Their family is saved. In front, the wife's face became even uglier, but she didn't show any extra moves, and still sat dignified on the soft chair. At this time, Dai Yun's didn't care about Mr. Long. He jumped off the stone platform, and his martial spirit was naturally retracted. Then he gave Yu Hao below a big hug, and said incoherently, "Yu Hao, we succeeded." Yu Hao didn't know how he succeeded, but he was still happy, especially after seeing that his brother was the legendary innate full spirit power. He was even happier and hugged Dai Yun's in return. Not far away, the lady looked gloomy as she watched the two brothers hugging each other. Then, she stood up and left with a group of maids. Ah, it's the evil-eyed white tiger. Is it the evil-eyed white tiger? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392 Compromise? Dai Yun's and Yu Hao also saw the lady leave, but they didn't think much about it. Yuns just pulled Yu Hao to the registration place and said, "Let's finish the registration quickly and go back to find Mom to tell her the good news." Yu Hao just smiled and nodded in agreement, saying loudly, "Yeah." Mr. Long watched Yuns pull Yu Hao over, and there was still a look of surprise in his eyes. But then, he just shook his head, sighed softly, and walked towards the door of the hall. This child, maybe it's better to stay with Moon. Yuns, who was busy registering, didn't notice Mr. Long's departure. This registration was not troublesome, just report your name, martial soul and soul power level. Yuns' own is naturally the evil-eyed white tiger, with a soul power of level 10. As for Yu Hao, Yuns told the attendant in charge of registration that his martial soul is called Ling Mao. Although Yu Hao didn't get to say anything, he still secretly wrote down the name Ling Mao, thinking it was really nice. After completing the registration, Yuns immediately left the temple with Yu Hao and headed for home. He was eager to tell Hoyuner that he had awakened the evil-eyed white tiger martial spirit. On the way, he had already begun to imagine his future life. When he no longer had to worry about food, clothing, housing and transportation, he must first have a good meal, change out of his current extremely uncomfortable coarse linen clothes, and then have a good sleep on the soft bed. After waking up, he would take Hoyuner to see a doctor and cure all the lesions on her body. As for Yu Hao, he would urge Yu Hao to practice hard and strive to be consistent with the original work, and then take Yu Hao to the Star Dao Forest to find the Xianmeng ice silkworm. This kind of life, the life he had longed for 4 years, seemed to be coming. When he and Yu Hao ran to the door of the house together, before they even stepped inside, Yuns couldn't help but shout loudly, "Mom, my martial spirit!" Then, he and Yu Hao ran into the yard together. All the words that had not yet been finished were stuck in his throat. He and Yu Hao also stopped and stood at the door of the house. For the first time, so many people gathered in the small courtyard. But it should have been a lively scene. Instead, the atmosphere was quiet and solemn. Their mother, Hoyuner, was standing in front of the door of the house with a rather uneasy look. When she saw them, her eyes were immediately filled with worry. In front of Hoyuner stood the Duchess in a luxurious long dress, and behind her stood a group of maids and guards. The madam, who was originally facing Hoyuner, turned around at this time, walked through the maids and guards, and walked towards Yuns and Yu Hao with a smile on her face. Yuns protected Yu Hao behind him, and his eyes were full of vigilance and confusion when he looked at the madam. He looked at the madam who was gradually approaching and said, "Why did the madam come to our house?" Although he thought it was unlikely, looking at the madam's scene, Yuns could hardly help but suspect that the madam wanted to kill them directly to get rid of them once and for all. Apart from this possibility, Yuns could not think of any other reason for the madam to come here. The smile on the lady's face deepened a little, but in Yuns' opinion, it was more like a fake smile. The lady spoke in a bright tone, as if she had heard something particularly interesting, and said, "Look at you, kid. This entire Oaks mansion belongs to me and my husband. Why can't I come here later?" Hoyuner lowered her head after hearing this. It was obvious that the lady's words just now were not just for Yuns to hear. Yuns pursed his lips, and finally couldn't help but smile sarcastically, saying, "But, your last name is not Dai, right?" The smile on the lady's face froze a little. So, she simply stopped smiling and turned into an expressionless look. She said, "Now that things have come to this, I don't need to say anything more. According to the rules of my husband's family, since you have awakened the evil-eyed white tiger martial spirit, I naturally have to report to him. I have sent someone to clean up your previous residence in the Duke's mansion, and you will move back later." Hearing this, Yuns was stunned. He looked at the lady in confusion. Although she had no expression on her face, she still unconsciously revealed a feeling of superiority when she looked at him. Moreover, when she said those words just now, although her tone did not have much emotional ups and downs, Yuns could still clearly feel the intense unwillingness hidden under her calm face. Everything is normal. But why? The meaning of the Duchess's words just now was equivalent to telling them that she had no choice and could no longer hide the existence of him and Yu Hao from the Duke of White Tiger. In other words, she admitted defeat. And letting them move back to their original residence, is it to please them? The lady should still be afraid that they will complain to the Duke of White Tiger, right? But, is this possible? Yuns wanted to doubt it, but he couldn't find a reason to doubt it. Because all of this now is a scene he has imagined countless times. What's more, after saying that to him, The lady just turned around and looked at Hoyuner, said congratulations lightly, and then took everyone away from their courtyard. It was as if she really just came to congratulate Hoyuner to resolve the previous conflict. Dai-yun's was still a little bit unbelievable until the lady left for a long time. Is this the end? The Duchess compromised like this? The tragic and painful fate of their family ended like this? The absent-minded Dai-yun's was awakened by Hoyuner's gentle call. Hoyuner said, "Eat quickly, Yuns, what are you daydreaming about?" Then Yu Hao's crisp voice rang out, "Yes, brother, try the cold chicken, it's delicious." Dai-yun's looked at the luxurious meal in front of him, and Yu Hao who was eating heartily. This was something they dared not think about in the past 4 years, and now it has come true. Looking around again, it was no longer the bare-walled house in the past 4 years. Not long after the lady left, a servant came and took them back to their original residence, and then brought this sumptuous lunch. Looking at Yu Hao who was eating non-stop, and Hoyuner who kept gently asking Yu Hao to eat slowly, this somewhat heartwarming scene made Dai-yun's feel as if a big stone had fallen from his heart. Yes, that's it. He did it. He succeeded. The tragic and painful fate of their family ended here. Although he didn't want to admit it, he still felt a little uneasy in his heart. But looking at Hoyuner and Yu Hao, he chose to ignore it. He chose to believe that he really succeeded. I said before that we would know where Tang Liu died in 2 or 3 chapters at most, and now it has been postponed again. Dodge, that's all for today, see you tomorrow. Chapter 393 Dream. At night, Dai-yun's had a dream. Even though he was lying on a soft big bed, there was no Yu Hao around him to grab the quilt, and he slept soundly. But he still dreamed. In the dream, he found himself standing on the stone platform where the martial soul awakening ceremony was performed during the day, and there was a vague figure standing in front of him. Although he couldn't see the face of the person in front of him, Dai-yun's knew that the person should be Mr. Long who awakened his martial soul for him. In addition, although his dream restored almost every detail of the hall during the day, there were only him and Mr. Long. Of course, Mr. Long was just a vague black shadow in his eyes. But such a black shadow actually made Dai-yun's feel extremely uneasy, and he seemed to be able to faintly hear a very strange chirping sound. Then, he saw that a black shadow suddenly separated from the black shadow in front of him, like ink splashing in water, first passing through the stone platform under his feet, and then entering his body. Dai-yun saw the whole process as a bystander, and when the shadow flowed, his body on the stone platform became transparent, so he found that the shadow flowed into his body, and saw that the shadow that entered his body seemed to be gradually absorbed by his body. As the shadow was gradually absorbed, another force emerged from his body. For some reason, the newly emerged power made Dai-yun feel extremely uncomfortable. It was like a creepy feeling that people instinctively feel when encountering dangerous things, and it was accompanied by a bit of chilling coldness. But at the moment when the power appeared, Dai-yun was extremely shocked to find that everything around him had stopped. Whether it was the surging shadow, the energy surging from his heart, or even space and time, they all stopped abruptly. As everything stopped, Dai-yun found that the world in his eyes seemed to be gradually getting brighter. It was a kind of light that he couldn't describe exactly. It was very mysterious and ethereal. It was blue-black. It penetrated from the ground of the hall and gradually filled the empty space of the hall. Then, he saw a hand. A hand stretched out from the void. And that hand was behind him, stretching out a slender index finger and gently tapping on his back. In an instant, he saw a mysterious blue-black rune appear in his transparent body. At the same time, a feeling of being invaded by a foreign object came again, instantly evoking related memories in his mind. He had the same feeling when he awakened his martial soul during the day. But at that time, he thought that Mr. Long had done something to him. But now it seems that maybe that good-looking hand is the culprit? Before Dai-yun had time to think about it, he found that when the blue-black mysterious rune was completely formed in his body, the new power in his body and the creepy feeling disappeared. He didn't even have time to be surprised, because immediately afterwards, everything that was still suddenly returned to its original state. There was no blue light filling the whole palace, no hand that appeared out of thin air, and no mysterious blue-black runes in his body. It was as if everything was just his illusion. The next moment, he woke up from his dream and suddenly opened his eyes. But he was shocked to find that he was not sleeping in his own room. The surroundings were not the scene of his home. Instead, it was empty and dark. Behind him was a huge stone tablet with countless complex runes engraved on it. And just now, He was leaning on this huge stone tablet and dreaming that dream. The creepy feeling swept over his body again. He looked at the stone tablet with some fear, and slowly stepped back a few steps with vigilance and anxiety. In his senses, as he continued to retreat, the world seemed to be becoming quieter and quieter, and finally reached a dead silence. And at this moment, when he was highly nervous, a slow and steady footstep suddenly sounded from behind him. He immediately turned around and shouted loudly, "Who?" A gorgeous figure in a luxurious long dress came into view. It was the Duchess. The Duchess also saw Diane's in front of the stone tablet, but there didn't seem to be much surprise on her face. She just paused for a moment and continued to walk towards the stone tablet, and finally stood beside Diane's. When Diane saw that the person coming was the Duchess, he was also quietly relieved. After all, the Duchess was at least a human being, not a strange thing. But he still wondered why the lady came to this place at night. Of course, he also wondered why he was here at night. It couldn't be that he was sleepwalking, right? And why did the Duchess act as if she was not surprised at all that he was here? Although he had many doubts in his heart, Diane did not choose to ask the Duchess. Because the Duchess was also threatening to him. He didn't believe that the princess of the Xingluo Empire would be a soul master. Diane just stood there in silence, but kept a posture ready to run at any time, looking at the Duchess and the stone tablet. That made him feel a little weird. However, after a long time, the Duchess just stood there, looking up at the stone tablet, without saying a word, completely ignoring him. Diane became more and more confused, and felt that if he continued to stay here, something bad might happen to him, so he thought of leaving. But just as he took a step, the Duchess, who had been silent beside him, suddenly spoke. "Diane," he stopped walking. "The news that you have awakened the evil-eyed white tiger martial spirit should have reached the ears of the white tiger duke by now," the lady continued to speak. "The rules passed down from generation to generation in the white tiger duke's family cannot be violated even by me, so I can no longer attack your family, and I can no longer hide your existence from the white tiger duke. But there is one thing I don't know if you have heard of." Reason told Diane that he should leave immediately and return home. But he just couldn't move his body. Because the Duchess's words just now aroused his curiosity. Intuition told him that what the Duchess was going to say next should be very important to him, so he must stay and listen carefully. He adjusted his breathing and asked, "What is it?" The Duchess laughed softly, then turned around and faced Diane. It was at this time that Diane saw the strong malice on her face. He secretly cried out that it was not good, and subconsciously wanted to escape. But the Duchess seemed to be sure that he would not do that, and just said to herself, "Although you have awakened the evil-eyed white tiger martial spirit, and you will have the qualifications to become an heir in the future, you are not of an orthodox origin after all. According to the rules passed down by the Duke's mansion, you will be taken by the Duke of White Tiger and practice with him in person. You can only leave after the Duke of White Tiger himself confirms whether you really have the qualifications to inherit." Diane had a bad premonition. And the premonition became a reality in the Duchess's next words. Chapter 394 Innocence. The lady said calmly, "But from the time you set out until the time when Duke White Tiger completes the confirmation, it will take at least 5 or 6 years. And before the Duke went to the border to fight, he told me that without 7 or 8 years, he would hardly have time to return to the Duke's mansion to handle affairs, so he handed over the power to me. Think about it, when you were practicing with Duke White Tiger, and Duke White Tiger was busy fighting. So, during this long period of time, the only people who could protect the safety of your mother and your brother would not be in the Duke's mansion. Tell me, if I did something to them during this time, do you think Duke White Tiger would know?" A simple sentence made Diane feel like he was struck by lightning. He immediately retorted, "Impossible. Do you think that I would not reveal the existence of my mother and brother to the Duke of White Tiger? Do you know what will happen to you if I tell the Duke of White Tiger what you told me today?" The lady laughed, looking confident of victory. "Yes, I really can't just kill your mother and your brother openly, but what if I ask someone to add some poison that can slowly kill people in the food they eat and the water they drink every day? You and the Duke are not here, who can know it was me?" Diane's mind was working frantically, trying to find a way to crack the lady's conspiracy. "No, you can't. I will tell the Duke these words truthfully." The lady laughed even louder. She took a few steps closer, and the pressure from her body made Diane's a little unbearable, and he took a half step back. Madame stared at Diane's eyes. "Of course you can tell him, it doesn't matter if you tell him everything, But you still can't stop me from killing your mother and your brother. Why? Just because I am his legal wife? Just because I am the princess of Xingluo? Just because you and your mother are just lowly servants? Do you think that the Duke of White Tiger will really let me be buried with him or divorce me directly because of the death of 2 servants? Haha, he dares. If he is not afraid of making the Duke of White Tiger humiliated in Xingluo, he can come. Dai Yunzi was a little stunned. He said blankly, "No, you are lying to me. I have awakened the evil-eyed White Tiger, and he will definitely protect my family." Madame raised her hand and gently stroked Dai Yunzi's cheek, but Dai Yunzi avoided it as expected. But she did not stop there, but immediately moved closer, forcibly pressed her hands on Dai Yunzi's face, forcing him to look at her. She said pityingly, "Oh silly boy. It's you who awakened the evil-eyed White Tiger martial spirit, not your poor mother, nor your useless brother. The Duke of White Tiger only wants an heir, so as long as you are still alive, is it really that important whether the other 2 servants are dead or alive?" Dai Yunzi looked at the lady in front of him. The madness on her face and in the depths of her eyes frightened him, and what she said before made him feel confused. He had to admit that he was scared. He had no tricks. The lady smiled and said, "Child, naivety will cost you a price." After saying that, she pushed Dai Yunzi away, walked to the stone tablet with an indifferent look, and gently stroked the runes on it. Dai Yunzi did not resist at all, and was pushed to the ground by the lady's not-so-light force. He sat on the ground in a somewhat decadent manner and did not get up again. Although he didn't want to, he had to admit it. The lady was right. He was really too naive. And now, he will pay the price for it. In the bleak night, even though he felt extremely humiliated, he still had to speak out desperately to beg the Duchess standing in front of the stone tablet. He said in a low voice, "What should I do? What should I do? Can you let my mother and brother go?" His voice was a little hoarse. "What should I do?" A contemptuous smile slowly appeared on the lady's face. She stood there and waited for a while before turning around and walking to Dai Yunzi on the ground, looking down at him. "I am just a mother who cares about her children," Dai Yunzi suddenly burst out. "Don't talk nonsense. Tell me what I should do." The lady looked at the hysterical child on the ground, and her expression was more contemptuous. But she knew that the child in front of her had surrendered. Completely surrendered. That meant that he would become a dog in her hands that she could control at will. The lady snorted softly, folded her hands in front of her abdomen, and looked elegant and dignified. She moved lightly and walked around. She said, "I have indeed conveyed all the details of today's martial spirit awakening ceremony to the Duke of White Tiger, and he should know everything now. However, in the letter I sent him, the one who awakened the evil-eyed White Tiger martial spirit was not the child born to him by his old lover, but another maid with whom he had sex. It's a pity that the maid had died of illness a long time ago, leaving only a child to live alone in the Duke's mansion. And I, the Duchess, felt sorry for this child, so I decided to adopt him as my adopted son." Even though he had certain guesses, Dai Yunzi was still shocked by the lady's words. He looked at the lady, with a look of horror on his face. "You? How dare you do this?" The lady smiled and looked at him. "Your mother and your brother can survive, and I can also let them maintain their current lives and no longer oppress them. And you must cut off contact with them from now on, never mention them to anyone, and never tell anyone the true relationship between you and them, including the Duke of White Tiger." The lady came over, leaned over slightly, and smiled at Dai Yunzi, who lowered his head and said nothing. "How is it?" She lowered her voice. "Do we deal?" Dai Yunzi raised his head in disbelief and looked at the lady's face. The lady didn't care about his gaze, but just straightened up and looked down at him. After a long while, Dai Yunzi trembled and said, You. The lady raised a palm to stop him. "Now, what should you call me?" Dai Yunzi looked at her with great resentment, closed his lips tightly, and panted violently. The lady patted his head gently. "Don't worry, one day you will get used to it." She laughed and left. Dai Yunzi leaned forward, stretching out his hand as if to grab the back of his wife. But he could only support his body weakly, clenching his teeth. The funny thing was that he couldn't even say "I will make you pay the price." He knew that he was completely defeated. His wife ruthlessly destroyed all the hope in his heart. He felt that his whole body was wrapped in despair and pain as vast as the deep sea. A piercing coldness spread over his body. He curled up on the ground. His body was twitching terribly. And in the twitching, his martial spirit was released by itself. It dyed a few strands of his hair white. It made him taller. His clenched fists became wider. Dark stripes appeared on the outer skin. On his forehead, A black stripe formed the word king. Above the word king, a pattern that looked like both a trident and a crown. Black stripes also appeared on his cheeks. Suddenly, a pale lightning flashed across the sky. It illuminated his eyes that had already turned dark. Heavy rain fell without warning, wetting his whole body. But it couldn't cover up the gradually spreading, cold and evil aura. Tried to update 3 times but failed. That's it for today. I just wanted to post the last chapter. After all, I finally talked about Liu, who I haven't seen for a long time. But I enjoyed writing about the lady, so I added this chapter. But I have to say, the lady is so scary. But can the lady really say something like "do we deal?" ? Is she actually a time traveler too? Doge. Chapter 395 Blue Light. Yu Hao found that his brother seemed to be a little bit abnormal today. From morning to night, all day, except for eating time, he locked himself in his room. He went in to see, but he only saw his brother sitting by the window in a daze, silent, looking very melancholy, as if hiding a lot of things in his heart. But when he asked, his brother just smiled and shook his head, and said to him softly, "I'm fine." He asked him again, "Do you want me to play with you?" "Okay, what shall we play?" He shook his head and said, "Brother, I'm grown up." Then, he saw his brother startled, turned his eyes to the window again, and whispered softly, "Yes, you've grown up." He didn't know what was wrong with his brother. Although his brother was not very active at ordinary times. But there was no moment like today, lifeless. But except that he became a little quieter, his brother didn't have any other abnormal behavior. Although Yu Hao was worried, since his brother didn't want to tell him, he could only let it go. Dai-yun slept very restlessly. His brain couldn't help but recall the experience of last night, and wove him an extremely real dream, which continued to torture him. In the dream, the lady's face was like a ghost face that he saw everywhere, with a hideous smile, and she kept repeating those words, chaotic, weird, intertwined, constantly echoing in his mind, disturbing him, crushing him, pulling him into deep fear and despair, until there was no way back, and then a push made him fall in the dark abyss. There was no end. And he could still see a pair of dark eyes looking at him with strong malice. Laughing at him, he could only let himself fall, powerless to resist. Who was the owner of that pair of dark eyes? He didn't know, but he felt a little familiar. But when he tried to see the full picture of those eyes, his endless fall suddenly ended. It ended abruptly with a voice. The voice bid a smile and said in a low voice, "Do we deal?" He woke up from his dream. In the midst of heavy panting, he first noticed that there was something wrong with the scene that came into his eyes. Then he found that, in fact, there was something wrong with him. This was not his room. He was not sleeping. He was standing with his forehead against a hard object. At the same time, his martial spirit was also in a state of possession. After feeling the cold and hard object against his forehead, he immediately stepped back a few steps and looked at the object in doubt. It was still the stone tablet full of complex runes. Dai-yun took a few steps back again, his chest heaving, and then looked at his hands covered with black stripes. He clenched his fists, and then took back his martial spirit, and the changes in his body after the martial spirit possessed him began to reverse. Dai-yun looked around, somewhat puzzled as to why he came here again. But he still wanted to get away from this place as soon as possible, because staying here, those bad memories kept appearing in front of his eyes. But as soon as he turned around, he found out of the corner of his eye that something seemed to be flashing on the stone tablet. Dai-yun's pen naturally attracted his attention, and he turned his head to look over. It seemed that a certain rune on the stone tablet was flashing. He was very familiar with the color of the light. It was blue-black. Dai-yun stood there, hesitating whether to go over and take a look. The blue light was still flickering slowly. He finally plucked up the courage to walk over. Because he felt that the scene he saw in his dream that day, this blue light, and the hand, the suspected owner of the blue light, seemed to have no malice, and seemed to be helping him. As he got closer, Dai-yun found that the location of the rune flashing with blue light seemed to be the part where his forehead was leaning before he woke up. And the style of the rune was very similar to the mysterious rune he saw in his dream, which was left in his body by that hand. So, was it this rune that attracted him here? Dai-yun looked at the rune that was still flashing, and finally chose to slowly raise his hand and press it down. But his hand did not feel like it had touched anything real, and it fell into the air. He also stumbled for a while because of this. When he looked up again, he found that the surrounding scene had changed drastically. Dayun's was no longer in front of the stone tablet, but in an open area. And the sky was bright, not at night. It was just that the light here was a little strange, the same color as the light in his dream. So, in Dayun's eyes, the surrounding scene was like a blue-black filter. Dayun looked around and felt a little lost, but strangely, he didn't have the slightest fear of suddenly appearing in a strange place. He looked around and finally found that there seemed to be a building at the end of a direction. Maybe he should go there. Dayun stood there and thought for a while, and decided to go over and take a look. After all, he didn't know where he was now, and there should be no way to leave for the time being. In this empty place, the appearance of the building was a little abnormal. Maybe there was an exit. After making up his mind, Dayun walked towards the building. But when Dayun took the first step, he stumbled again, and the building that was originally at the end of his sight now appeared in front of him. Dayun was stunned when he saw the wooden door with a blue-black light filter in front of him. But before he could figure out the reason for his sudden change of position, the door in front of him opened slowly with a creak, revealing the scene inside the door. A cobblestone path with lush, blue grass on both sides. Dayun knew that the grass was the blue-silver grass that can be seen everywhere in Douluo continent and has a very special status. At the end of the path, there is a magnificent wooden house. Dayun didn't know why he used the word magnificent to describe the wooden house, perhaps because the house really looked like a magnificent palace. He hesitated at the door for a while, and finally chose to walk into the wooden door in front of him. This time, his position did not change inexplicably, and he crossed the threshold smoothly and stood on the cobblestone path. Without the wooden door and the wall blocking his view, he realized that the space inside was not small. The wall extended all the way to both sides, but he could not see the corner. It seemed that the wall was built directly beyond the end of his sight. But in such a large space, apart from the cobblestone path in front of him and the wooden house at the end of the path, there seemed to be no other buildings. Looking around, there were lush blue-silver grass everywhere. Countdown to meeting. Today is the author who still has not stood up and is even shorter ORZ. I was planning to add a little more to this chapter. At least until the Uzi shows up. But I think it's better to do it tomorrow. I'll save the draft by the way. Doge. Chapter 396 Youth. Dayun withdrew his gaze and decided to keep going forward. As he moved, the wooden door behind him creaked again. When he looked back, the door had already closed again. It seemed that he could not get out for the time being, but it should also mean that he came to the right place. Dayun paused for a moment, and then continued to walk forward along the path. On both sides, the dense blue-silver grass swayed gently, as if dancing in response to a certain rhythm, but Dayun clearly did not feel any wind blowing. Dayun was not willing to think about it, but just slightly quickened his pace and walked towards the wooden house. The path was not long. About a minute later, he walked under the wooden house, stood in front of the door of the wooden house, and looked up at a sign on the wooden house. It seemed to be two characters, somewhat like small seal characters, but Dayun could not recognize what the two characters were. Looking at the characters, he couldn't help but feel a little confused. After all, the characters in Douluo continent were different from those in his previous life, so why did the characters that looked like small seal characters appear here? He couldn't help but think of his wife's words "do we deal," and his face turned a little pale. But he had already come here, and there was no way back. Dayun took a deep breath, walked to the door of the wooden house, raised his hand, hesitated for a moment, and decided to knock on the door. His fist knocked on the wooden door twice, making a slightly dull dong-dong sound. But when he was about to knock for the third time, the familiar feeling of failure came again, which meant that his fist failed to land on the door of the wooden house. Looking around, as expected, he was no longer outside the house. Instead, he was in the wooden house. Inside the wooden house, Dayun was surprised that the surroundings were not as magnificent as he saw from the outside, but gave him a messy and old feeling. What caught his eye were tall bookshelves all around, which were full of books. The covers looked very old. In addition to the bookshelves, there were many glass display cabinets with various things placed inside. Dayun took a glance and found that some display cases contained metals and stones of different colors, some contained weapons, and some contained plants and fruits. But the most were those that contained floating bones that flashed with various colors. Dayun, who was familiar with all the settings of Douluo, was immediately shocked. Could those bones be also bones? This. He walked to the display case closest to him involuntarily, and his whole face was almost pressed against the glass of the display case. His eyes kept looking at the bone floating quietly inside. This bone has knuckles, so it should be an arm bone. Dai Yun's compared his hands and confirmed that it should be a right arm bone. This right arm bone exuded a light blue light throughout. After careful observation, Dai Yun's could see some small whirlwinds circling between the finger bones of this right arm bone from time to time. It should be a right arm bone with wind attributes. Dai Yun's face was full of curiosity and surprise after seeing the treasure. He murmured, "Is this the soul bone?" "Yes, this is the soul bone." A somewhat childish voice suddenly reached Dai Yun's ears, and it seemed to be very close. He subconsciously turned his head to look over, and then saw a child who was about the same age as him, standing on tiptoe to look into the display case, staring at the green right arm bone. Dai Yun's was stunned and stepped back in fear. When did this person come to him, and why didn't he feel anything? The child also looked at him at this time, staring at him with strange blue-black eyes. "Don't move, Dai Yun's. Are they going to kill him to silence him?" How could he listen to the child? He turned around immediately and wanted to run away at full speed. But as soon as he turned around, he bumped into a display case before he ran out a step. The display case was not heavy, so he directly knocked it down, and at the same time, he and the display case fell to the ground. Dai Yun's pills. Crash! It was the sound of glass breaking on the display case. He subconsciously closed his eyes, but the expected pain of falling to the ground did not come. At this moment, he only felt the pain of hitting the display case just now. In doubt, he opened his eyes again, and then found that he was actually still in the air at a 45-degree angle with the ground, so he did not fall down with the display case. Dai Yun's was confused again. "I told you not to move, but you didn't listen," the childish voice sounded again, and then Dai Yun saw the child from before slowly walking to his side, looking at him with a little dissatisfaction and contempt with beautiful and enchanting blue-black eyes. To be honest, this child was too beautiful to be real, as if he had walked out of a painting. But Dai Yun had no time to appreciate the other person's appearance at this time. He just stared blankly at the other person's right hand raised to him, and looked at a blue-black light that was like mist on the palm of the hand. He lowered his head again, and found that a circle of the same light was wrapped around his waist. It was because of this circle of light that he did not fall down with the display case, but was slightly suspended in the air. The child looked at him, snorted, and then waved his right hand, and Dai Yun's body slowly turned over and finally landed steadily. At the same time, the child raised his left hand and pointed it at the fallen display case. He shook his fingers lightly, and a blue light flashed at his fingertips. The next moment, the damaged display case was restored to its original state in the sudden burst of blue light. Dai Yun watched all this happen in shock, and finally his surprised eyes fell on the child next to him. "You?" The child snorted again, hugged his arms and said, "I thought that after I became the same age as you, you would be more accepting, but you were still scared and broke a cabinet of mine." What a waste of expression. Dai Yun saw him tilt his head slightly, and then a circle of blue light rose from the bottom of his feet, surrounding the surface of his body and rising rapidly. Wherever the blue light passed, his child's body also changed, and finally turned into an extremely handsome young man. The young man narrowed his eyes, which were exactly the same as when he was a child, and looked down at Dai Yun's. Dai Yun looked up at the young man's face and couldn't help but take a half step back. Because, although the young man in front of him was not a very strong physique, he had a well-proportioned figure and was more than 1.8 meters tall, which was still very oppressive to him. The other party was now looking at him with a look of suspicion and confusion on his face. Chapter 397 Evil Spirit. Seeing that the other party didn't speak for a long time, Dai Yun bravely spoke. "You? Who are you?" The young man retracted the expression on his face, shook his head gently, then turned his hands behind his back and walked towards the depths of the wooden house. "Follow me." Dai Yun looked at the other party's back, hesitated for a moment, and decided to follow. However, as soon as he took a step, he found that the space beside him had been replaced again, and he suddenly felt a sense of falling. But the feeling of falling disappeared as soon as it occurred, because Dai Yun sat on a somewhat quaint leather sofa. Before Dai Yun could figure out what was going on, he saw the young man walking over from the side, and then sat on another single sofa opposite him as if nothing had happened. The young man moved his fingers, and two blue lights lit up on the coffee table in front of them. When the blue light dissipated, 2 cups of steaming tea appeared on it. The young man looked at Dai Yun, Drink tea. Dayun's was very nervous. Thank you, thank you. The young man picked up the cup in front of him and took a sip. Seeing this, Dayun's also picked up the cup of tea and drank it carefully. He was indeed a little thirsty. And although the tea looked steaming hot, the temperature was just right. The moment he swallowed it, a warmth instantly spread throughout his body, and he immediately felt a lot warmer. After drinking a sip of tea, Dayun's cast his eyes on the young man sitting opposite him. How to say it, in addition to having a very handsome face, the young man also has a kind of ethereal and dust-free temperament, which makes him look unreal, but also adds a bit of mystery to him. Thinking about the fact that the other party seemed to live in this temple-like place, and the magical abilities that he had shown before, Dayun's immediately thought of some things in his memory. He was a little confused. Could it be that wizards also exist in Douluo continent? The young man looked at Dayun's with a speechless look on his face. Dayun's also found out and was shocked. Could it be that the other party could read his inner thoughts? The young man sighed and muttered, "Sure enough, he is just a child who knows nothing about the world. I really don't understand." Dayun's didn't hear it clearly. After hesitating for a while, he said, "Excuse me, what did you say just now?" The young man put down the teacup in his hand, leaned on the back of the sofa behind him, squinted his eyes, and said, "Let me introduce myself first. My surname is Tang, and I am the owner of this space." "Just as you thought, I led you here." Dayun's pondered for a while before speaking. "Then Mr. Tang? Why did you lead me here? Also, I had a dream before that when I awakened my martial soul. Did you also appear?" The young man sat up straight again and smiled. "I have been observing you for a long time, Dayun's. As for your question just now, yes, that's right. When your martial soul awakened, I did appear, and then helped you a little." Dayun's was stunned. "Help me a little favor." The young man turned sideways, crossed his legs, with a playful smile on his face. "What do you think your own martial soul is?" Dayun's opened his mouth and wanted to say the words evil-eyed white tiger. But the words stopped just as they came to his mouth. He also thought that his martial soul was the evil-eyed white tiger before. "Not now." The young man smiled softly and said, "Evil-eyed white tiger? Do you really think it's that simple?" After hesitating for a while, Dayun still shook his head softly. The young man chuckled twice, crossed his palms and fingers in front of his chin, and said, "Of course, strictly speaking, your martial soul is indeed derived from the evil-eyed white tiger, but it has undergone a certain degree of mutation." Dayun's put the teacup in his hand on the coffee table in front of him, and then stared at the quaint porcelain teacup. After a long while, he said, "What has it mutated into?" The young man looked at him with a faint smile on his face. "What do you think?" Dayun's raised his head and looked at the young man opposite him. "Am I an evil soul master?" The young man nodded and smiled. "Otherwise, I wouldn't have to help you cover up the evil aura of your martial soul in front of so many people. Think about it, if Mr. Long, who awakened your martial soul for you, found out that you are an evil soul master, what would happen next?" Dayun's didn't say anything, and didn't dare to think about the consequences of the scene. The young man said, "The existence of evil soul masters is absolutely a crime that everyone should kill on Douluo continent." He didn't know Mr. Long's background, so he didn't know if he would tell the Duchess if he found out he was an evil spirit master. If the Duchess knew he was an evil spirit master, she might be very happy. After all, she didn't even need to find another reason, she could just send someone to kill him. After a long silence, Dayun's asked again, "Who is Mr. Long?" The young man crossed his arms, smiled and said, "Why don't you look for the answer to this in your own memories?" The young man's voice was melodious, and there was a hint of frivolity. He looked at the child opposite with a deep look, and his tone seemed to have a different meaning. Dayun's looked at him in disbelief. "You?" The young man snorted twice. "I said, I have been observing you for a long time. From the moment you were born in this world, I began to pay attention to you." Dayun's began to find it difficult to swallow. You know." The young man put down his hands and stopped crossing his legs. He said lightly, "I know almost everything." He stood up and walked to the side. "We know each other almost well. Now, let's talk about business." Dayun's watched him pass him and walk behind him. He turned around and asked, "Wait, what are you talking about?" He stood up in a hurry, trying to catch up with the young man. However, the next moment, he stumbled again, and his hands subconsciously reached to both sides, trying to grab something that could help him stabilize his body. He finally grabbed the edge of a bookshelf, looked up and looked around. He was no longer on the sofa, and there was no shadow of the place he was just in. All were tall bookshelves full of books. Looking up, the figure of the young man was floating in the air, his fingertips brushing the books above, as if he was looking for something. While searching, the young man was still mumbling to himself, "The Chronicle of Soul Masters Martial Souls written 20,000 years later should be nearby." Oh, here. After that, Dai Yuns watched the young man float down with an extremely heavy book in his hand, stand in front of him, and then hand him the book. I just read the previous few chapters, and was embarrassed by the typos. I clicked my toes and made a Barbie dream house. The most uncomfortable thing is that the modification function is locked, and I can't change it yet. If the editor in charge of the backstage can see it, can you please unlock it so that I can correct the typos? Liuzi finally showed up, and a short drama must be arranged. Tang Liu looked at Dai Yuns, who almost fell to his death, and felt extremely puzzled. "This is the new task target assigned to me? You want me to take care of the child, right?" Dai Yuns looked at Tang Liu, whose special effects were maxed out and whose behavior was full of deja vu, and felt particularly puzzled. Is this guy cosplaying Doctor Strange? Wait, then I will become the Thor who is being teased? So will my hair be killed? Tang Liu, what a kid, doesn't he know that he sees the truth but doesn't say it? Dai Yuns, you charlatan. After looking at the time span of my updates, I suddenly felt so sorry for you guys. QWQ. Chapter 398 Martial Spirit. Take it, turn to the 6th page of the Ultimate Martial Soul, which is the 6182nd page of the whole book, and you will have a general understanding of your own martial soul, the young man said to him, and then threw the book that was comparable to several Xinhua dictionaries to him. Dai Yuns hurriedly caught it, but was almost knocked to the ground by the weight of the book. Then, before he could stand firmly, he found that the space around him had changed again, and he fell to the ground because of this space change. When he raised his head, he found that he was no longer indoors, but outside, in what seemed to be a small pavilion. The small pavilion was surrounded by lush blue-silver grass, and the blue grass looked very comfortable. Dai Yuns stood up from the ground, picked up the heavy book, looked at the young man who was sitting leisurely at the stone table opposite and drinking tea, and complained, "Can't we just come over?" The young man glanced at him with a funny look. "Take the heavy book in your hand." Dai Yuns sat on another stone bench, put the book on the stone table, and said, "Pretend I didn't say anything." Then, he opened the extremely thick Chronicle of Soul Masters Martial Souls in front of him and turned to the page that the young man asked him to read. The first thing that caught his eye was a picture, which should be a painting. It was a white tiger. Like ordinary tigers, this white tiger was also huge, with clear muscle texture and huge and sharp tiger paws. The difference was that the stripes on the white tiger were as black as ink, and the pair of tiger eyes with fierce light were gray and black, and it even looked a little lifeless. Unlike ordinary tigers, the white tiger's forehead does not only have a king character, but also a gray-black stripe that looks like a trident and a crown, just like the pattern that appears on the foreheads of many tabby cats or American shorthairs. In addition to these, the white tiger has a pair of gray-white wings on its back. And, the long tail that looks exactly like an ordinary white tiger at first glance, but when you look closely, you will find that each section of the white tiger's long tail divided by the black stripes is a bone joint that looks a bit creepy, and at the end of the long tail, there is a hook with a slight arc. It looks like a scorpion tail. Looking at this picture of the white tiger, Dai Yuns' memory immediately emerged with a very similar description. Dark Demon Evil God Tiger. But the Dark Demon Evil God Tiger is completely black, and it is a completely corrupted white tiger infected by the evil god. And this one still belongs to the category of white tiger. Its name is not the Dark Demon Evil God Tiger. Instead, it is called the God-Devouring Evil Eye White Demon Tiger. It is a variant of the Dark Demon Evil God Tiger and an extension of the Evil Eye White Tiger. When the evil god descends upon the white tiger, guiding it to fall and mutate, it will eventually become the Dark Demon Evil God Tiger. But if during the process of falling and mutating, the white tiger devours the evil god in turn, it will be the God-Devouring Evil Eye White Demon Tiger. It has the same extreme evil and dark power as the Dark Demon Evil God Tiger, but it is different from the Dark Demon Evil God Tiger as a follower. The God-Devouring Evil Eye White Demon Tiger is a god-devourer, a blasphemer, and the other side of gods and demons. It is precisely because the God-Devouring Evil Eye White Demon Tiger has not completely fallen that it still retains the appearance of a white tiger. And because it devoured the existence of the evil god, it means that even if the God-Devouring Evil Eye White Demon Tiger is the ultimate evil and darkness, It is not afraid of the sacredness and light that are on the opposite side. Because the existence of the god-devouring evil-eye white demon tiger can be said to be a different kind of sacredness and light. It is the third side of the sacredness and evil in the general sense. It is a predator and chaos. So, is this his martial soul? Dai Yunzi was shocked and completely immersed in the descriptions. He looked at the painted white tiger and felt as if it was also looking at him. When their eyes met, he actually felt a throbbing in his blood. Do you understand now? The calm voice of the young man reached his ears and pulled Dai Yunzi back from the shock. He looked at the young man drinking tea opposite him and finally calmed his overly excited heart. Dai Yunzi asked, "But my martial spirit?" The young man smiled slightly, as if he had expected it, and said, "There is no pair of wings, and no tail, right?" Dai Yunzi nodded slightly. The young man smiled, shook his head, and said, "With your current level, you are not qualified enough for the power of the god-devouring evil-eye white demon tiger to be fully manifested in you. After all, logically speaking, it, like the dark demon evil god tiger, should not be a human's martial soul. Because when the martial soul is awakened, the human body cannot withstand such a powerful force." Dai Yunzi was puzzled. Then the young man shook the teacup in his hand, and said absent-mindedly, "Maybe it's because you have a soul from another world." Dai Yunzi's heart trembled again. The young man put down the teacup in his hand, looked at Dai Yunzi, and became serious. "Okay, you can close the book. Now, let's talk about why you came here." Dai Yunzi also wanted to know the reason for this question. He listened to the young man, closed the book in front of him, and also looked at the young man and said, "Then may I ask, why did Mr. Tang lead me here?" The young man smiled lightly and said, "I have been here for tens of thousands of years, so sometimes I can't help but feel a little bored. Most of the time, I have nothing to do, so I can only fall asleep to pass the time." "It's a pity," the young man suddenly showed a distressed look, and continued, "When people get old, sometimes the quality of sleep will decline. When I can't sleep, I have to find something to pass the time, so as not to be bored to death." Dai Yunzi looked at the other's too young face, and said with some confusion, "So," the young man smiled, "so I set my sights on the outside world." Dai Yunzi vaguely felt that he had grasped something. The young man continued, "In order to add some brilliance to my long life, I began to observe the humans in this world, and then I thought of an extremely interesting way to kill time." Speaking of this, the young man paused, and a rather malicious smile appeared on his face. "I began to bring some people into my world, and then play a game with them that I call unequal transactions. I will let those people help me complete some tasks, and after they succeed, they can take something from me. Similarly, they can also let me complete some tasks, but in return, I will also take something from them." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399 Transaction. And the fun of this game of unequal transactions lies in the 3 words unequal. Sometimes, my request will be very simple, but those who make transactions with me may get a very generous reward from me after completing it. Similarly, sometimes, my request will be very difficult, but those who complete it may only get a little insignificant. When this game started, my life finally became more than just sleeping, and it became interesting because I observed those who made transactions with me. Dai Yunzi reacted and looked at the young man. "Do you want me to be the next one to trade with you?" The young man tilted his head slightly and made a very long hum sound representing thinking. After a few seconds, he looked at Dai Yunzi and said with a smile, "That's right." Looking at the young man opposite with bad intentions, Dai Yunzi suddenly felt a chill in his heart, as if he was communicating face to face with a villain with a perverse personality. He said with some difficulty, "Can I refuse?" Although he said so, Dai Yunzi knew in his heart that the young man in front of him was not someone he could resist. Not to mention the blue light that seemed like the magic in his memory, the young man's ability to change space at will was enough to kill a 6-year-old child who had just awakened his martial spirit. Therefore, he was afraid that he could not avoid this unequal transaction game. But to Dai Yunzi's surprise, after he said that, the young man in front of him actually nodded and said, "Okay." He was a little unbelievable. "What?" The young man shrugged and said with some regret, "Of course you can choose to refuse. I am not a kind of pervert who must have someone to do business with me." Dai Yunzi looked at the young man in confusion. Why does it feel like this young man seems to be easy to talk to? But then, the young man suddenly changed the subject, which made Dai-Yun's nervous again. The young man smiled and looked at Dai-Yun's. It's just that I helped you cover up the evil spirit master's aura of your martial soul before. I wanted to use this to make you make a deal with me, but since you choose to refuse, then I have to give up and change to another thing to offset it. Dai-Yun swallowed his saliva and said nervously, what do you want me to do? After all, the young man in front of him really helped him, so if the other party really wanted him to help do something, he couldn't refuse, and it was impossible to refuse. The young man showed a slightly distressed look again, and seemed to be a little entangled. Well then what else? His eyes lit up, as if he thought of something, looking at Dai-Yun's, and said seriously, just do exactly what the Duchess told you yesterday to offset the favor I helped you before. After saying that, the young man couldn't help but laughed, and his laughter revealed a very disgusting bad taste. Dai-Yun's expression was a little ugly. His first reaction was that the young man in front of him was in the same group as the Duchess. But then, the young man smiled and denied him, no, I am not in the same group as that boring Duchess. Although her background is very powerful, what does that have to do with me? In my opinion, she is no different from those wanderers in the slums. Dai-Yun looked at the young man who kept laughing, smiled bitterly, then lowered his head slightly and said, even so what? His voice became a little lower, anyway. I can only do what the Duchess said, there is no other way. The young man slowly restrained his smile and asked, so do you agree? Dai-Yun paused for a long time before gently nodding. The young man did not respond immediately, but slowly folded his arms, looking at Dai-Yun who was lowering his head opposite, with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Then he laughed again, and said, you agreed just like that. How boring. He put his hand on the stone table in front of him, tapped the table with his fingertips, and continued, I thought that people like you who came from another world were very strong-willed. However, you actually agreed to my request just like that. It seems that you really want to become a person who follows the orders of that Duchess? Just swallow your anger like this. Dai-Yun still lowered his head and murmured in a low voice, then what else can I do? I really have no choice. Even if I know what will happen in the future, what else can I do now except swallow my anger? For a second or two, the young man did not move, and there was no expression on his face. However, Dai-Yun suddenly raised his head, and his eyes seemed a little sinister. He said almost word by word, but this does not mean that everything is over. The young man looked at him quietly, waiting for his next words. Dai-Yun smiled softly, now I know what my martial spirit is. In addition, I am born with full spirit power, so I have a future in this world. As long as I have strength, strong enough strength, I will return to the Duke's mansion and kill the Duchess with my own hands. At the end of his words, the smile on Dai-Yun's face had completely disappeared. What remained was a fierceness that seemed to be ready to devour anyone. The young man frowned slightly and said, I underestimated you a little. But, he then showed that evil smile again, your mother, the mother in this world, Hoyuner, do you think she can hold on for so long, until you become strong enough, until you come back to kill the Duchess with your own hands? Or do you intend to ignore her life and death, as long as you can kill the Duchess, no matter what the price is? Dai-Yun was stunned, and then he was at a loss. He finally lowered his head again, frustrated. I don't know. The young man had an expression of control. So, do you really want to choose to do what the Duchess said? Or do you want to make a deal with me and then exchange it for a way to help you solve the current situation? Dai-Yun looked at the young man. Can you help me? The young man spread his hands. If you are lucky enough, of course. Dai-Yun didn't know what to say now, but he still noticed a fire rising deep in his heart. He nodded heavily, his eyes full of determination and ruthlessness. He said, I agree to trade with you. The smile on the young man's face widened. Then, the game begins. Tang Liu, regarding the fact that I racked my brains to find ways to rush to send benefits Dai-Yun, this charlatan has bad intentions and must want to harm me. Originally I wanted to write to quickly complete the first transaction so that Tang Liu could send out the first wave of benefits, and then basically end this our pre-plot and start the main text. But as I wrote, it turned into an endless conversation, which is really a headache. Cyrillic letter Z. However, the pre-plot is indeed about to end. And then go directly to the main text. Regarding the setting of Dai-Yun's martial soul, it is an evil martial soul with extreme attributes, and it is not afraid of martial souls like holy angels. After all, Yu Hao opened the ultimate ice, not afraid of holiness and light. and can in turn restrain the evil undead magic, so I also added the setting of not being afraid of holiness and light to Dai Yun's, so as not to be restrained too much. Chapter 400 Letter. Dai Yun's looked at the palace in front of him. It was the place in the Duke's mansion where the White Tiger Duke handled official business and received guests. But at this time, the White Tiger Duke was still fighting on the border, so the only person here was the Duchess. Early in the morning, he was brought to the main hall by a servant, who said that the Duchess wanted to see him. Although Dai Yun's was extremely reluctant to see the Duchess's face again, he had no choice. For Hou and Yu Hao, he had to agree to the lady's request. The servant stopped outside the door of the hall, so Dai Yun's walked in alone. At a glance, he saw the Duchess sitting on the first seat and reading documents. The Duchess wore a veil today, covering most of her face. After seeing Dai Yun's come in, she also closed the document in her hand, and her eyebrows and eyes exposed outside curved up, as if she was smiling. Dai Yun's heard the Duchess say, "I have received the reply from the Duke of Beihu." Do you want to guess what he said in the letter? Dai Yun's expression seemed a little cold. After all, he really couldn't show any good face to the Duchess. His tone was also a little stiff. "If the lady summoned me here just to tease me, then I'd better leave first." After hearing this, the Duchess's eyebrows were hung with a look of boredom. She gently pushed her right hand on the table, and a letter was pushed to the edge of the table. The Duchess said lightly, "This is a letter he wrote to you." Dai Yun's walked up half-believingly and took the letter in his hand. There were a few vigorous and powerful words written on the withered yellow cover. "To my dear child Dai Yun's, Dai Hao." Dai Yun's looked at the words on the cover, especially the two words child, without saying anything, and without any expression, but just felt it was ironic. He looked at the Duchess again and found that she was also looking at him. Dai Yun said, "If there is nothing else, I will go back." The Duchess smiled faintly and said, "Please." Dai Yun turned and left immediately. But just after he took 5 steps, the Duchess's voice with a chuckle rang out again behind him. "Oh, by the way, I forgot to remind you." Dai Yun stopped and looked back, just in time to see the Duchess gently taking off her veil and then glancing at him. The Duchess had a smile on her lips, and her eyes only fell on Dai Yun's for a moment, and then moved to the veil in her hand. She smiled and said, "The Duke has ordered you to set off tomorrow and head for the Mingdao Mountains. He will personally meet you in the military camp." Dai Yun's body trembled slightly, and he looked at the Duchess, and his tone seemed a little unbelievable. "Tomorrow?" The Duchess still kept that kind of chuckle. "You have one last day to say goodbye to your mother and your brother. Before dawn tomorrow, I will have someone prepare the carriage and the escort team. I hope you won't be late." Dai Yun's clenched his fists tightly, and even the letter in his hand was crumpled into wrinkles, but he still stood there without saying a word. The Duchess made an expression of sudden enlightenment again, looked at Dai Yun's, and said, "I almost forgot. I hope you haven't forgotten what you promised me before. From tomorrow on, you will have nothing to do with that bitch and that evil child." Dai Yun stared at the Duchess, and had to restrain himself with all his strength, so as not to completely lose his mind because of the 2 names said by the Duchess. After a long while, he was able to speak out, "I will not break my promise." "What about you? Can you really do what you said? Stop suppressing my mother and brother, and give them their original life in the Duke's mansion? Can you do these 2 points? The Duchess slowly restrained her smile, curled her lips, and said, "Can I go back on my word?" Dai Yun still stared at her intently. "I want you to swear in the name of the goddess of life. Otherwise, even if it is a fight to the death, I will tell the Duke of White Tiger everything you have done." The expression on the Duchess's face became a little ugly. She snorted coldly and said, "You are quite cunning, young man." Dai Yun also said coldly, "Swear." Otherwise the Duchess also said coldly, "Then it's as you wish." When the Duchess began to swear in the name of the goddess of life, Dai Yun's mind seemed to fall into trance. It was not until the Duchess finished swearing that he turned around and left the main hall in a daze. The moment he walked out of the door, an indescribable feeling of coldness suddenly swept over his heart. Now, Mother and Yu Hao should be fine. Even if the Duchess really regretted it, she could not do anything to Hou and Yu Hao because of the oath. In this way, he would be relieved when he left. Dai Yun walked on the road in a daze, until he left the main hall far away. He looked at the envelope in his hand that was crumpled by him. Looking at the words on it, Dai Yun fell into a certain memory in his mind. "Let me think about it. What should we do in the first transaction? Well, let's make it simple. Why don't we just not read the letter from the Duke of White Tiger?" "Ha ha ha ha." Yuns pinched the envelope and felt the touch of the folded paper inside the envelope. He murmured, "Predict the future." He stood there for a long time before he moved again. A gray-white light suddenly lit up in the hand holding the envelope. In less than 3 seconds, the yellow envelope turned into a ball of ashes under the impact of soul power. Yuns waved his hand gently, and the ashes drifted away, and then disappeared completely. He looked at the stone tablet not far away and murmured, "You don't have to tell me, I won't look at it. After all, this person is nothing to me. When you finish, you can come to me to get your reward, and then you can also ask me for a trade. Of course, you can also just take your reward without asking me for a trade, in which case, the trading game between us is over." He paused, and then walked towards the stone tablet. The moment his palm pressed on the stone tablet again, he suddenly disappeared from the spot. But what he didn't know was that not long after he left, a person also appeared on the square. It was the Duchess. She looked at the stone tablet and gradually revealed a strange smile. No matter where you are, naivety always comes at a price. Today, the author still didn't stand up. "I'm a little stuck. I've been thinking about Yuns's future all day and how to arrange for him. I just figured out everything, so I won't say much today. See you tomorrow." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.